on, so we're now going to go public. Just to advise everybody, committee meeting is going to be recorded as usual and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings, also online. Apologies, with an apology from Dan Dodds. Chair's business. So, a couple of things, or a few things on Chair's business. The palliative care report launch event was held, as we all know, on Tuesday, 2nd of December in the Long Gallery. It was an absolutely great success. I want to extend my thanks to all those who attended and showed their support. I want to particularly put on record today at the committee my thanks on behalf of all the committee members to the clerk and his staff. It is an excellent piece of work, and I mean, part of that, or a big part of that, goes to the clerk and their team in terms of sifting through all the evidence and putting it together and compiling it in the way that it was, and helping us as members to ensure that we have produced an excellent piece of work. So I just wanted to put that thanks on record here today. Committee today will also consider its forward work programme next week. Part of that will be setting out its strategic objectives. So this will include work streams focused on palliative care, because the work doesn't stop now that we have done our inquiry and produced a report. There's an obviously expectation out there that we will certainly do our best to see those priorities implemented, so we're going to do that. Also, members, following on from our visit to the Southwest Acute Hospital last week, want to advise members the Minister is scheduled to brief the committee on the 26th of February on trust governance and accountability. So the Minister indicated due to diary pressures he'll only be available for an hour, but I know after that visit members will have a number of issues that they will want to raise with the Minister and the Department on what we heard and learned last week. So I'm sure there'll be opportunities before that, but certainly from a committee's point of view, there will be an opportunity on the 26th of February to raise that.
Is it just confirm it in 2 months and 2 weeks' time, and these diary pressures, and can only give us an hour? It's worth underlining, at least in the minutes, I'm sure.
Yep. So the other thing then, a couple of other things, flu vaccine. So people will have heard in the media today the concern and the rise of flu incidents and the pressures that's putting on right across our healthcare sector. So I know the committee were invited to the matter a number of weeks ago to access our flu vaccine. So again, I just want to put on record in public today in view that I would encourage everybody out there who is entitled to get the flu, in fact everybody, to get the flu vaccine, because it doesn't only just protect themselves and their family, it protects our healthcare system in totality. And we're only in the 4th of December, we already see the pressures that we're under. No doubt, unfortunately, that's going to get worse as we move through the winter. And I suppose it's important to flag up that there is the potential, even though we're coming up to the Christmas recess, etc., that there may well need to be urgent meetings with regard to that, as they've happened in previous years. So I think it's important to flag that. And one, or do you want to come on that?
Yes, Chair, thank you. So I heard some of that story covered in the media this morning, and I'm just thinking back to our visit at the Mater Hospital, and I think it would be good. I know that obviously the figures will change then daily in terms of how many health and social care staff have received their vaccine, but if we could maybe get the latest update on where those figures sit, because I was chatting with one of the nurses at the hospital the other week, and she was saying that last year when the uptake was extremely low, like sitting around the 20s, that they were able to sort of put in place like an emergency measure where the nurses who can give the vaccinations were able to actually go out onto the wards to give staff their vaccine there and then, because it is obviously difficult for staff as well to, when they're either finishing a shift or before they start a shift, they're getting home to their families, they've all the same pressures as all the rest of us. So the easier we can make that for health and social care staff, I think that that should be an option that we'll look into for this year, particularly given the spike that we've seen, which is worrying.
Well, we'll contact the department just expressing our concerns and trying to follow up with regard to that suggestion. Thank you, Ursula. I mean, the other thing, as I say, some of us were at the Public Accounts Committee's launch this afternoon there with regard to access to general practice. Not a new issue, and certainly not a new issue to the members of this committee, but it's a very good report. It relies heavily on 15,000 members of the public who responded and gave their experiences, so that in itself is something that we all need to take note of. There's obviously a number of recommendations there, so I think it's important, just from our own point as the Health Committee, that we know what our role is now on this issue. I know we have continually raised this with the department and the minister in terms of the ongoing issues with GP and access and its impact on patient care. If I could ask the clerk, just with regard to this report now, so the PAC have launched it, the department will have to respond to it, is that correct?
The department will have to respond within a certain timeline. I can't remember exactly what the timeline is, but they will have to respond to it, so we can certainly request to be copied in the any response from the department.
Would it be useful, committee members, if we wrote to the minister and the department just acknowledging the report and asking to be kept up to date with regard to the implementation of the recommendations as well? I think that would be useful. And then lastly from me is the issue of pay increases for social care workers. This is an issue that we raised with the minister when he was previously here. There was some confusion in the aftermath of that. The committee wrote to the minister looking for clarification in relation to that. I think we were made aware that he was then going to meet with the independent sector because they were, like us, a bit concerned about some of the commentary from himself and the department. We haven't received an update on that yet. I would think we should go back to the department expressing our concern that we haven't had a response yet. I know I've engaged with a number of independent care sector providers this week and last week. They're concerned. Some of them took the minister's commitment to the pay increase in September and applied that earlier on in the year, and now that's having an impact on their business model because they were of the understanding that the independent care sector were going to benefit from the increase, and they haven't, and they now don't know when it's going to be. So I think we should express concern to the department we haven't got a response, but also ask for the response, but a firm time frame if we can get it when it will be implemented, and ask if it will be backdated to September. Nicola?
I wonder as well, in addition to that, I support that. I mean, I think I also have a concern around the lack of, or the discrepancies in the information that we sought, because the minister, that when he was here 2 weeks ago, said that he had asked for a report then on the information. 2 weeks, that wouldn't have taken that long to put that together, the actual facts of what happened. So it's worth pursuing. I know we'll do as individual MLAs, but I think it does. Serious questions were raised by the sector. They said it was over 80 who did need it, and he was saying it was 70 who didn't need it. I don't think it takes 2 weeks to put together what actually happened and how a decision came to. So if we could do that as well.
Rhoda?
I have real concerns about this. Everybody who presented to us, whenever the trust came, whenever we first established as a committee, and a number of times since under your own chairship as well, everyone who's presented to us said the biggest issue right now was getting people out of hospital and social care, and the department gave us a clear indication that that was a priority for them. The trusts, actually, some of the trusts have started doing some really good work on the basis that they believe the department were taking this issue seriously and that it needed to be addressed. And from my perspective, it looks like it's just fallen off the edge again. So I think your timeline as a definitive date for the start of the real living wage, and how that will be funded. So not that's when we want to start it, and then next year, oh no, can't fund it now, no money. So how it will be funded. Will it be backdated? And if it's going to be backdated again, how that's going to be funded, and if the new minimum wage rate being brought in from the 1st of April 2026 is going to be taken into account in relation to the real living wage, or whether that will have no impact. We just need to understand some of those things. But my biggest concern, and I want it on the record, is that we were led to believe that this was a priority, that getting people out of hospital was a priority because of the pressures that our hospitals are under. We are spending, constantly having asks here about more money from the Minister, and I understand, and I'm sick saying this, that I understand the pressures he's under, because I do. But we can't keep spending money in the wrong way and not drilling down into that, not trying to get to understand that actually if you change how you spend money rather than constantly asking for more, that's not how life works. There isn't more. So it's how we spend what we have.
Yeah. No, I mean, the two things that we've raised at the start of this, whether it's GP access and our work in social care, are key strategic priorities. We are told by the Minister and the Department of Health, either in the reset plan and also in the winter plan, and it just isn't working out in reality as it seems. Danny?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate what Linda was saying as well, but just to add to it, this was unveiled to us at the urgent meeting when we called the Minister in about the winter pressures last year, and he sat there and he unveiled this real living wage pledge, and I think nearly everybody congratulated him, and we all thought it was a great move to bring social care up. It was an investment in social care, and it was to help the winter pressures this year. Now he hasn't done it. We're now in winter pressures this year. They're going through the roof. We're in possibly a worse situation this year now already. One other thing I wanted to ask as well, he had mentioned that he had decided not to do it, I think under the advice of Peter May, when Peter May was still Permanent Secretary. Now that means it was before April last year. So he decided very earlier in the year that he wasn't going to do it. I'm just wondering if that could be cleared up as to when that actually happened.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, moving on then. Draft members, just refer everybody to draft minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November. They're at page 5. Everybody content? Okay, thank you. Matters arising? No. Okay, so moving on then. Oral briefing on the Adult Protection Bill. Can I refer members to papers, page 16 of our main pack, and welcome our guests. So we have Miss Rhoda McBride, Interim Deputy Executive Director of Social Worker within the Belfast Trust, Mr. Colm McCafferty, Director of Children's Services within the Southern Trust, Miss Deborah Hanlon, Head of Services Adult Safeguarding, again Southern Health Social Care Trust, Professor Lorna Montgomery, Professor of Social Work within the British Association of Social Workers, and Miss Shears, National Director here in the north of the British Association of Social Workers. So you're all very welcome. I'm going to hand over to yourselves just for some introductory remarks, and then we'll take questions from the members.
Okay, I'm happy to start. I'm Rhoda McBride. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of Social Work in the Belfast Trust. And Chair and members, it's a great opportunity for us to come along today to present. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to the committee on behalf of the Belfast Trust. We really welcome the Adult Protection Bill because up to now we've been working in accordance to the adult safeguarding policies and procedures, and we feel the bill puts us now on a statutory footing. The bill, alongside the statutory guidance, we think will actually strengthen adult protection and lead to greater consistency and awareness, which we welcome. The principles we certainly embrace because those are core social work values that we all hold dear, in that we put the service user at the centre of our decision making. We act in their best interests and according to their wishes and feelings. But having said all of that, the bill highlights really significant powers whereby we can intervene when it is appropriate and when it's necessary to do so in order to safeguard individuals. So we outlined a number of issues in our submission. I'm not going to go through them all, you'll be pleased to know, but I want to highlight 3 issues in particular, if that's okay. So the first area is really in relation to resources. So the bill does create additional duties and powers on social work within the Trust, and these include the need to seek court orders, which will obviously require additional resources. It will also require to get legal advice. We'll also have to be preparing reports for court and attending court, and clearly there's cost implications for that. In addition, other services will be impacted by the bill as well, like ambulance services, DLS, the police, and they're already working, as you know, they're experiencing significant resource pressure, so it's really important that we work collaboratively with other agencies. So therefore the bill means that we will need additional social work staff, but in addition, in order to undertake the duties to a competent standard, we will also require additional training to do that. Currently within the Trust, we year on year have had a steady increase in referrals. Those referrals have become more complex in nature, and therefore demand is exceeding capacity. And there has been underfunding in that area, so that is something that we would stress that we would need additional resources before we move forward. The second point I want to make is that we're very pleased to see the need for independent advocates within the bill, and I know this has been enshrined within the MCA legislation as well. Sadly, that part has not been implemented. But in our feedback, we outlined the need for independent advocates. We felt they needed to be truly independent from the Trust. They needed obviously to be sufficiently funded. They need adequate training, and supervisory arrangements need to be put in place for them. And we need to be able to access them when a need is required. So that would be 24/7 in the event of emergencies. And then the third area, which I suppose is particular significance to the Belfast Trust, is in relation to CCTV. And I have been a lead in safeguarding, and I have extensive experience in the role of CCTV played, particularly in the Muckamore investigation. And as you all know, without the existence of CCTV, it's likely the abuse would never have been uncovered. Because in Muckamore we have service users who not only lack capacity but also have limited communication skills and therefore are unable to report abuse. So CCTV has proved to be a really useful tool in our investigation in Belfast, and it also provides really good evidence for court proceedings. Some families have been at the forefront of advocating strongly for CCTV, and they're saying that it offers transparency to them, and they're also saying that they feel reassured by the presence of CCTV. It also can be a safeguard for staff, because when referrals are raised, CCTV can be looked at, and therefore referrals can be screened in or out in relation to that. But I suppose from the Trust perspective, we also recognise that CCTV does interfere with human rights, especially Article 8 rights, the right to privacy and family life. However, we feel its use can be justified if it's pursuing a legitimate purpose and it's proportionate. So in terms of a legitimate purpose to prevent or protect individuals from abuse, and then in relation to making sure it's proportionate, it's really central that there's robust governance arrangements in place. And that's really important because it's not always appropriate for every location, but it may be for some locations. So the purpose of why CCTV has been installed, where it's located, how it's stored, how long it's stored for, who can access it, and the reason for accessing it. CCTV is not the panacea for everything, as you know. So even with the presence of CCTV, sadly, abuse can still occur. But it is one tool that we have found very useful, but it has to be used hand in hand with other measures like safe staffing levels, like robust care plans, like adequate training for our staff, and also a culture whereby people, staff, service users feel empowered to actually escalate and speak up about abuse. CCTV, in our experience, is also quite complex, and I know some people think looking at the CCTV, if an incident occurs for 5 minutes, you just go in and look at it for 5 minutes. Our experience has been it's very resource intensive, and also with that comes additional cost. So obviously there's time to view it. Also, training is required for those who view it. And thirdly, there needs to be an MDT approach to it. So in our experience, we not only had operational staff viewing it, we also had safeguarding staff viewing it, and then we had to bring experts in at times in relation to the use of restrictive practices. So it has to be done not in isolation, it has to be done hand in hand with all of those other processes. One just comment that, and obviously I'm speaking on behalf of the collective of Belfast, was we also felt that given new developments and the use of body cams, we wondered whether the bill might also consider that to be included. And then just one final comment, we also felt that it would be important that emergency provisions are also outlined within the bill. So that's a summary of our submission from Belfast.
Go ahead. Does anybody else want to speak? Go ahead.
I'll maybe from the Southern Trust perspective, so I'll not cover what my colleague Rhoda has already outlined, other than to say absolutely consistency in terms of my view. Suppose I should say I'm here in my capacity as the Executive Director of Social Work in the Southern Trust, and I have professional responsibility for adult safeguarding, and I'm accompanied by Deborah Hanlon, who's the operational lead, who has developed very considerable expertise and knowledge over the last number of years with regards to adult safeguarding. I think it might be helpful for the committee if we just provide a wee bit of context in terms of some data. Southern Trust serves a population shy of about 400,000 people throughout the age range, basically. And just to contextualise adult safeguarding, in the 24-25 year, last year, we would have received approximately just short of 1,000 adult safeguarding referrals. So, give or take, I think that works out at about 3 a day. So not insignificant. Approximately 50% of those, 30%, so 1 in 3 of those referrals will translate into an adult safeguarding investigation and assessment. So just to give a wee bit of a context with regards to it. I think the other important stat to understand is that 50% of those those referrals relate to alleged incidents in the adult's home. And I think that's important from the point of view of emphasising the role of communities, voluntary organisations, relatives, other interested parties in terms of being attuned and alert to the signs, symptoms and circumstances that unfortunately safeguarding incidents occur. Clearly, another 50% happens outside of the home setting, which again emphasises the need to have organisations wholly attuned and then to have systems and processes in place to respond. In the Southern Trust, I would have to say we are very fortunate in that we have what we call the LASP, or what is known as the LASP, which is the Local Adult Safeguarding Partnership. And that's a forum of voluntary, community and other statutory sectors, police, local council, trust, and a broad range of voluntary and community providers, plus critically with a service user input. And that meets regularly, and its remit is about sharing information, sharing good practice, but also constantly looking at methods and ways to keep adult safeguarding basically in the public domain, because that is the only way that we will raise awareness and so forth. Returning to the bill, the Trust did provide written submission to the committee's consultation, I think back in September, so I'm not going to get into the detail with regards to that, but similar to my colleagues in the Belfast Trust, we absolutely welcome the introduction of the bill. Important to note, we are the only jurisdiction in this region that doesn't have adult safeguarding to date on a statutory footing. Having it on a statutory footing is really important in terms of even just from the practicalities of clarity around agency, professional responsibilities around reporting, certainly solidifies the whole process around investigation and indeed the authority of designated individuals and so forth. So we absolutely welcome that. Specifically welcome the focus in the proposed legislation on the best interests and the primacy. And and again, you think that's obvious, but it's really important to have that enshrined in legislation in terms of decision making and practice. Very much welcome the inclusion of the adult in decision making and in the assessment. And again, we may think that's common sense. really important to have it enshrined in legislation where we have an absolutely obligation to do that. So fully welcome that. The human rights emphasis, and critically from our perspective, we absolutely welcome the emphasis on the multi-agency focus, because it's an impossible task for responsibility to be in any, one agency responsible for it. It absolutely has to have that multidisciplinary awareness, both in terms of the identification, detection, but also in the response. So again, that's very, very important. There's certainly work that we need to do. All of this here, is about, having adequate trained staff, not just those of us who are directly involved in it, but across all of health and social care, both within statutory and the voluntary and community sector. There will be areas around consistent application of the threshold of harm, and that's, that can be tricky, and you only really get that with skilled, experienced, knowledgeable staff who are very, very used to working the system, which, in itself can be a challenge. So the success, is very much dependent on a robust plan for implementation with a continued focus on the multidisciplinary element of it. Most important to point out, staffing will always be a challenge, but it's important again to flag it up. In the Southern Trust at the moment, we have a small, highly skilled team of 5 social workers who are essentially responsible for the receipt and triaging and indeed the initial assessment of all the referrals that are coming in, and I provided a wee bit of data with that earlier on. I think the service does a robust job, but because of its smallness, it's always very susceptible to minor staff absences and so forth. So it's just important to keep that to the fore. Social work will remain the lead profession in terms of investigation and the assessment. So those of us in the leadership system have a responsibility to ensure that we are future planning. What we do know from all other metrics, whether it's child protection or anything else, I could confidently say that the trajectory for adult safeguarding activity will be an increase. So we need to ensure that we are future planning with regards to a sufficiently robust and well-staffed organisation and teams to be able to respond to it. A couple of other areas that's worth noting in terms of which will develop, and again we fully endorse, we welcome, and indeed we look forward with optimism with regards to how this year progresses, and that's the establishment of the Independent Adult Protection Board, and I think that will have a very significant role to play. The establishment of serious case reviews when things unfortunately don't go as intended or when there's a negative outcome, really important, similar to what we had in children's services for quite a number of years now, that there is a focus on learning, a focus on improving practice and so forth. So we really look forward to that. Rhoda's already talked about CCTV, and other than say totally endorse everything she says with regards to that, basically. So basically, in summary, we absolutely welcome the introduction of the bill. We look forward to working on in terms of areas around just, the investment that are required, staff training, as I've already talked about, the development of statutory guidance, policies and procedures, and I suppose my final comment with regards to it, ultimately, like any of these things, it's about how well we develop, or have a culture that's built on a person-centred, compassionate and dignified care across the entire system, because that ultimately will dictate how well we manage what's really the most vulnerable people in our community. So thank you for listening.
Thank you. I just want to help us.
You going next or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for inviting myself and Lorna here today. My name is Jane Shears. I'm the National Director at the British Association of Social Work for Northern Ireland and Scotland, and I am also the International Federation of Social Workers Global Ethics Commissioner. BASW is the largest professional association of registered social workers in the UK. We have members in Northern Ireland working across the adult statutory services, the community and voluntary sector, education, justice and academia, who all have a significant interest in the Adult Protection Bill. As the professional body for social work, we welcome the introduction of the Adult Protection Bill in Northern Ireland. Our members in adult services in Northern Ireland support the statutory principles within the bill and are in favour of a modern, compassionate, safeguarding system based on a human rights approach and the protection of vulnerable adults. However, simply embedding these principles into law is only the starting point. For them to be effective, they need to be consistently interpreted and implemented by all professionals involved. This is an enormous challenge which requires significant ring-fenced funding for extensive training and professional development across all agencies and professionals represented here today, as well as social workers. The bill ensures greater consistency in practice due to the legal clarity provided by placing adult safeguarding on an statutory footing rather than being policy-led. However, there are significant concerns regarding its practical and ethical implementation. The bill's potential impact on social work staff must be carefully considered. There are significant challenges within the social work and social care workforce in Northern Ireland, and further statutory responsibility as a consequence of the Adult Protection Bill, without the investment and resource to accompany it, will overburden an already stretched system. Academic research and lived experience from other UK nations demonstrate that while statutory frameworks provided much needed clarity and authority, they also significantly increased workload, administrative burden, and demand on resources. A proactive and well-resourced approach is essential to ensure the bill's success and to mitigate the risk of staff burnout and turnover. So the key point we would like to present to the committee is that to ensure the bill achieves its intended purpose without compromising human rights or creating an unmanageable burden on services, the following recommendations are made by BASW Northern Ireland. Firstly, there must be a proactive workforce plan. Like all other UK jurisdictions, the implementation of new and complex legislation has consistently suffered due to inadequate investment in the social care workforce. And to address potential and recruitment and retention issues in adult services, that workforce planning is needed now. Secondly, the role of the social worker and the Balancing Act. The bill will be as effective as the social workers who implement it, and there must be mandated high-quality inter-agency training on the new legal powers, the 7 principles, and the assessment of risk. The introduction of an adult safeguarding bill needs to be supported with a training programme, incorporated taught and experiential learning to support workforce knowledge and skills of the statutory powers, roles and responsibilities, and shared understanding of interpretation across the region. The implications for training within social work needs to be considered carefully, given workforce numbers and capacity issues in adult social care. Thirdly, acknowledgement of interagency challenges. Proactive engagement with all statutory, voluntary, private and independent sector partners is essential to ensure a shared understanding of roles and responsibilities of the new legislation. Comprehensive multi-agency training is required to ensure all professionals understand their duties under the bill and collaborate and cooperate effectively and consistently. Furthermore, research into the public understanding of adult protection has found a significant knowledge gap in public understanding of responses and a need for a targeted awareness training programme. Fourth, clarity of definitions and consistency of practice. The accompanying statutory guidance must provide clear, robust and practical examples to clarify the thresholds for intervention so it's not a catch-all for the whole of safeguarding. And this guidance should be developed in close consultation with frontline social workers and with experts by experience to ensure it is clear, consistent and provides the necessary clarity for professional judgment. And fifth, resourcing and funding. The social work professional duty to promote social justice and ethical practice requires a commitment to equitable resourcing. BASW Northern Ireland want to see a dedicated ring-fence budget to support the implementation of the bill, thereby enabling social workers to provide a high quality and ethically sound service. Social workers in Northern Ireland are already under immense pressure due to high caseloads, staffing shortages and a lack of resources. The bill introduces new duties and powers that, without dedicated and substantial funding, will be impossible to implement effectively. And the experience in England has shown that without proper investment, legal duties exist but resources are insufficient to meet demand. Social workers should also be facilitated to provide consistent responses across the region. Research evidence, which Lorna can expand on if you wish, indicates that areas of high deprivation experience a higher rate of safeguarding referrals, both in community and residential settings, and that responses to referrals are variable across geographical areas. This research evidence must and should contribute to a determination of where social work interventions are best focused. Chair and members of the committee, the Adult Safeguarding Bill has the potential to transform adult protection for the better. Its success, however, will be predicated on a realistic and well-resourced approach that acknowledges the significant demands it will place on the social work profession to prevent vulnerable adults from harm. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. That's been very useful. I'm just going to pick up on where we left the last point in terms of resource, because all of you at varying degrees talked about workforce issues, about training, the impact that it would have on staff, etc. So can I ask, have there been any engagement between yourselves and the department about the level of resources required, and if there's been any kind of smoke signals coming that resource is going to follow the implementation of this bill? Because the last thing that we want is, as you've said, a new piece of legislation that can't be implemented because there isn't either the staff to implement it, the training, or the resources.
Maybe there's been lengthy and ongoing engagement probably over the past 3 years, indeed even longer than that, with regards to trying to map the required social work resource, particularly because we are talking about primarily social work with regards to it. Important to point out, adult safeguarding is similar to many other aspects of social work in terms of demand versus capacity. There have been very, very significant recruitment challenges over the past number of years, which I think is fair to say, there have been proactive steps taken in terms of job planning, and the number of newly qualified social workers has increased, I think, approximately by 40 a year over the last 3 or 4 years. There have been different routes being pursued around, open university, internal job training and so forth with regards to it. But workforce will remain a challenge moving forward, and it's important to contextualise it's not just adult safeguarding. There's an expansion in quite a number of areas, namely primary care multidisciplinary teams. We are now inching towards the implementation of the Adoption and Children's Act, all of which increases statutory responsibility on social work services, including adult safeguarding. So there needs to be a continued focus on future planning for the workforce, and certainly my ask, and we continue to discuss this with workforce policy or workforce colleagues, that we need to ensure we avoid the difficulties we've had over the last 4 or 5 years, and that requires 5-10-year planning, and that does remain a challenge.
Okay, thank you. Rhoda, you talked in detail about the CCTV from, obviously a very experienced perspective within the Belfast Trust. So, we're hearing, positives, some concerns, etc. I'm just wondering if you could detail any additional safeguard. I mean, you did actually generalise safeguards and the importance of, you know, when, who, where it is used. But have you any like additional kind of specific safeguards you think that need to be added in the bill that will balance concerns around rights versus privacy?
I think the bill clearly sets out regulations that RQIA would have in relation to CCTV, but I think it's important for each organisation to have a robust CCTV policy. So some areas will not require CCTV. Some areas where service users lack capacity or have limited communication skills, it might be more appropriate in those areas. And therefore it's really important that an impact assessment is completed when the CCTV policy is constructed. It's also important that, because if you define what the purpose of CCTV, so if it is, the purpose is to assist with adult safeguarding investigations, then that means that therefore the reasons that you would be going in to look at CCTV footage would be in relation to when an adult safeguarding referral is raised, and not just to be going in on a witch hunt looking at what the staff are doing on their lunch break or what the patients are doing in the communal areas. So it has to be very focused, but as I said earlier, it's just one tool. I think it has to be accompanied by a whole range of things, and that's something that we clearly found out very quickly within Muckamore, because it has to be accompanied by, safe staffing levels. Staff need to be suitably trained. There needs to be other robust policies and procedures in place. So, for example, like levels of observation, what constitutes when somebody's put on a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1, all of that sort of stuff. So it's not a panacea, but I think it is a very valuable tool, and it provides good evidential basis whenever we go to court with regard to proceedings. So I do think it's a valuable tool, and in the right environment it's very valuable, but there are some circumstances if people don't consent to it and they have the ability to make informed decisions, then I don't know if it's necessarily required in those areas. But I think you can't do a blanket statement. Each situation has to be looked at in its own merits.
Okay, thank you, that's been useful. Just going to go around to other members who've indicated. Noah?
Thank you very much for coming along today. I have a few questions on different elements of it, and I'll start again with the social work staff and the placements. So I noticed that yesterday the department had talked about figures that were 700 new social workers since 2023, and to be fair, credit where credit is due. You can take that back, Alan, to your minister. I think it's really important that we do have an increase on the social work placements, particularly because we knew it was in a difficult state. But the difference then being adult social work and then family, what people know as children's social work. Is there, or have you seen, particularly from the trust's point of view, or perhaps from BASW either, are the vacancies more in adults or children's, and where are those places being filled by the newly recruited staff? Because if it's in children's rather than this, is where we're going to have the problems.
Yeah, I think it's well recognised that the vast majority of vacancies have been in children's services over the past number of years. That continues to be the case. Now, I certainly can speak for the Southern Trust, and I think it's generally reflective. There is progress being achieved, and we have incrementally moved forward with regards to rebuilding what has been a hugely compromised service over the past number of years. So the additional staff over the past number of years is beginning to pay dividends now, in the sense that we are certainly beginning to reduce our vacancy rate, but vacancies continue to be very significant. I still have some of our frontline children's social work teams that are sitting with 30+% vacancies, and I know I won't be able to fill those until the next cohort of students come out next summer. But having said that, just again to contextualise, into children's services we were able to appoint 29 additional social workers, which is the highest that we've done in quite a number of years now. We have a smaller number that has gone into adult services because there are less vacancies with regards to it. But it's still a challenge in particular specialisms, both in adult services and children.
Less vacancies, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've got what you need. So will there be a need to increase the number of posts for this legislation, and when do you think that, say this legislation is passed and it has a commencement date of next year, I'm not sure, I'm just saying that, say next September, when would commencement to fill those posts need to start place, or getting, you know, a business cases approved for?
This is important to point out, and I think the direction of travel will be an incremental introduction. So I don't envisage that it will be fully implemented next year, and I absolutely welcome that, because we simply wouldn't have the workforce to do it, basically. So again, as I said, there are business cases that have been developed over the past number of years submitted, but we're all very well versed in terms of the financial climate, and you know, transitioning a business case into boots on the ground are challenging at the minute.
But it sounds like, is it easier, and I don't use the word easier, that it is easy to get recruited into those adult posts than, or adult social worker posts, than the children and family services?
Historically, that might have been the case. Some specialists in some adult services now also experience difficulties in terms of recruitment, but it would be fair to say it is primarily children's services, but I do need to qualify that we need to be mindful of some specialisms within adult services as well.
I think the role of the adult protection social worker in the bill is also not at graduate level, so that would need to be factored in.
Sorry, say that again, I didn't hear that.
The role of the adult protection social worker is not at graduate level, so that also needs to be factored in, and has been within the business
and
case
what does
that's
that
been
mean?
completed.
So in reality of
It's
what it means in
experienced
patients?
It's more experienced staff, okay. So we would expect a minimum of a number of years, so it would be at band 7 level.
And with the independent advocates that would obviously be independent of trusts, would they require training by social workers as well, even if they are not social workers? I'm talking about if the Mental Capacity Act was, you know, fulfilled in line with this bill.
They would certainly require training. Obviously, social workers could provide some of that training, but a whole range of professionals could provide training to them.
And so I'm just trying to think what doesn't have to fall on a social worker.
Yeah.
And explore that a little bit.
And I suppose it is important to say that social workers in their own right also are advocates. So we do have a very primary role in advocating on behalf of our service users and our carers. But the difficulty is we do need independent advocates coming in, obviously, because we may be the people who will be pursuing the orders. So therefore that's why that level of independence is required. But it's important they have supervisory arrangements around those independent advocates as well.
And just with regards to the actual then outworkings of the bill, if it is passed, you mentioned about intervention and harm and serious harm. See, in policy, is it also included person and property in policy with regards to, you know, the wording of harm too? Is the policy also about property? Because in a number of your submissions there was discussions around what constitutes serious harm on the property side of it, and I'm just wondering if you could maybe expand on that for, you know, some of us who are looking at this as to what it will actually mean and the effect.
Yeah, the property refers to, for example, financial assets or people's personal belongings. So that's the definition of the property, and that is currently applicable within our current operational procedures. So that would be normal practice.
And currently, is it serious harm?
Within our current procedures and our adult protection investigations, we apply the definition of serious harm.
And this bill, what does this bill?
This bill refers to harm,
yes,
but it does refer to serious harm within the court settings.
And I think in reality it will end up being serious harm when you go to take orders, because referrals come in, we screen them and we determine using our professional judgment what level of harm they meet, and obviously then the ones that meet the category of serious harm then would be the ones that would go down the investigation route, and I would imagine under the bill those would be the ones then that we would be pursuing the orders for.
If you're talking about the bill as written and it's about the deprivation of someone's liberty or and the word it's just harm included, then would there then be concern that would need to just be serious harm, or is there enough kind of case law there that actually you don't need to? I'm just in terms of how the committee should view the wording.
I think that's a really important point you make, because it could open the floodgates and it could be very, very broad. And I suppose that's why we look forward to seeing what the statutory guidance is going to say, because I would imagine it will give us the meat of some of those issues that you're raising, and also give us direction and then in terms of how we take these things forward. But with regard to taking something to court, obviously we're going to have to provide significant evidence, and the court usually, it's quite a high bar. It usually would have to be significant harm before they would be considering either production orders and the banning orders or whatever. So I would imagine in reality it will be serious harm, but hopefully that will be specified in the statutory guidance.
I think the statutory guidance will give us clarification on that for the serious harm applications to court. But the front end piece around the referrals into adult protection, it's defined as an adult at risk of harm, and I understand that the reasoning for that wording as compared to what our current definition of an adult at risk of harm and an adult in need of protection was that we couldn't determine that adult needed intervention to protect them until we'd done the assessment. So that is why it is harm at that point within the bill rather than serious harm.
That's helpful actually to understand it, because we have heard a lot from our previous people giving evidence about definitions being very important. And just to ask then on the, I have a few more but no others have, so I'll just give the last question with regards to the overlap with the Mental Capacity Act. There was, I can't remember who it was, sorry, had talked about ill treatment and willful neglect and the penalties, and the kind of disparity between care providers, but also the overlap with that act. I don't know if there wasn't much contained within the written submissions, but also I don't know if anyone wants to elaborate on any considerations we should have for those, particularly on the penalties between care providers and care workers. I
think that's really for the Department of Justice to answer in terms of the detail around that.
Are you concerned that they're different?
I think there was a concern that seemed to be a high penalty for a care worker, but the details in relation to the corporate body weren't detailed within it. So similarly within the mental health order, there's talk about willful neglect and stuff. So I suppose it's how the Department of Justice then, how they determine what the sentencing or what the penalty would be in relation to that. Okay. But we just felt that there wasn't much detail in the bill in relation to that.
Okay. But that wouldn't be covered by the Department of Health anyway? Well, that's
the Department of Justice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. First to make a point and then to ask a question. I mean, in terms of the resourcing, obviously that's an issue we need to establish from the department, because I have seen it before in the domestic abuse bill. When the resourcing does not follow, you don't get the adequate training, and we actually create a false expectation that we're going to deliver something for people, particularly for women and children, that is not being delivered because PSNI or judiciary are not getting the proper training, so they're not actually implementing it correctly. So I think we really need to hone in on that issue around the resourcing. Then just for yourselves, so the bill obviously introduces the new criminal offences for ill treatment and unwillful neglect, and creates an adult protection board that understandably you would want to be a learning board rather than a blame focused board. So what safeguards and whistleblowing protections do you think that would need to be put either in law or guidance in order to ensure that frontline social workers and care staff are not scapegoated for under-resourcing or systemic problems? Are there suggestions that you have around that specifically, or...?
I think the focus, and I suppose with SAIs within the trust, the focus is, and DHRs, which I'm involved in as well, the focus is very much about learning. So I think it should be enshrined that these serious case reviews should be focusing on learning as opposed to blaming. Obviously, there may be occasions when steps may have to be taken if there have people have been negligent or whatever. But generally speaking, I do think that focus needs to be enshrined within the guidance and within the bill.
We do need to have something there in writing in order to ensure that, and I'm not sure, I mean, we need to I think, establish what that would look like, Chair. I don't know whether you have suggestions or anything. You don't have an answer to that today. I mean, if there are suggestions that you want to send to the committee in writing, but I just think that for us, we want to make sure that whatever is in this bill meets the needs of the people who have to work with them, meets the needs of the people who will actually have to deliver this and who understand this better than anybody sitting in this room.
I suppose it's important, that it can't just be looked at in isolation.
Yeah.
It has to be in the context of, agency, individual, professional responsibilities, the duty of candour, which committee will be well familiar with. So it's just important that we look at all of these aspects in the whole entire context. I think how staff, and I think, I absolutely thank you for raising that matter, because, in any of these settings, particularly when you get into protection, whether it's children's services or adult services, it is difficult. There's always risk associated with it, and I think there's a real obligation on us in agencies in terms of what support we put in place, what supervision we put in place, and then as a whole system, how well it's resourced.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Linda. That's all the questions we have for you. Thank you very much. The information and the presentations you've given us today are very, very useful. So we appreciate you coming along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, just moving then on to item number 6. Again, further briefing on the Adult Protection Bill. Can I refer members to our pack, page 52, and then we'll just welcome our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm just going to welcome forward Dr. Andy Green, Chair of the BMA's Medical Ethics Committee, and Dr. Ursula Mason, Chair of the Royal College of GPs here in the North. So you're both very welcome. I'm going to hand over to yourselves just for some brief introductory remarks, and then we'll take questions from the members.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your invitation to attend. My name is Dr. Andrew Green, and I chair the Medical Ethics Committee of the British Medical Association. This is a pan-UK committee, and we provide practical guidance to doctors and medical students on the day-to-day ethical difficulties that they face in their work, and our committee does include representation from Northern Ireland. We understand the need for this legislation, and indeed we support its intentions. However, as currently written, it fails to differentiate between two different groups. Firstly, we have patients with capacity who have the right to make their own decisions and whose consent is therefore vital for matters about their care. And secondly, we have patients without capacity who really must be protected. The result of this is that, as written, I'm afraid the bill is incompatible with the ethical principles that govern the interactions between doctors and patients. Patients who have capacity have a right to confidentiality, a right to autonomy, a right to control their data, and a right to make decisions which may seem to others to be difficult to understand or indeed likely to cause them harm. These are core principles enshrined in BMA ethical guidance as well as guidance from the GMC, and as is set out in our written evidence to you. Quoting from the BMA guidance, adults with capacity have the right to make decisions about how they manage the risks to which they're exposed, and such decisions should ordinarily be respected. These ethical principles are important because they preserve mutual trust, and they're founded on an expectation of confidentiality. Health data, by its very nature, is uniquely sensitive, and people rightly expect significant safeguards and strict limitations to its use. It's particularly important that patients who are at risk feel they can trust their doctor, as a loss of confidence from these patients may in fact result in the opposite of the intentions of this bill. For example, should victims of domestic abuse believe that their confidential information will be disclosed without their consent, valuable opportunities to intervene will be lost, and safeguarding referrals may actually decrease. Doctors simply cannot help patients who don't attend or who don't speak candidly when they do. Medicine is no longer practiced in a paternalistic fashion. It's the doctor's task to illuminate the paths that patients can then choose to follow. It's not the task of a doctor to force a patient down the particular path that doctor thinks best, particularly if that's against the wishes of the patient. Now, we suspect that these are unintended consequences of the bill and believe that only minor changes to wording are needed to exclude patients with capacity from its scope. These changes would in no way detract from the bill's worthy intentions or indeed present any impediment to preventing repeats of the abuses that you're trying to prevent. But above all, we must avoid damage to trust between doctors and patients, and we must respect patients' rights to autonomy. Finally, I would like to share a powerful quote from the BMA Safeguarding Toolkit. It is, I think, deliberately blunt. Competent adults retain the right to make decisions about how they wish to direct their lives. Neglecting or violating these decision-making rights, even where the intention is to protect the individual, can itself be a form of abuse. Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Mason.
Thank you very much, Chair and members, for the opportunity to present some oral evidence today on behalf of the Royal College of GPs in Northern Ireland. We represent about 1,400 members here, and as many of you know, I'm a practising GP in a large suburban practice of about 12,000 patients. You'll have already received our written evidence, and much of what I will say will probably mirror what Andy has just talked about, but I want to highlight a few of our concerns with the draft bill as it stands, focusing on how it would affect GPs and importantly our patients. To begin with, though, I would like to acknowledge the spirit and intention of this draft bill. It is a really important step in placing adult safeguarding on a statutory footing here in Northern Ireland and strengthening the protections for adults at risk. It's vital that families and patients have trust in the health and social care system, that it is there adequate protection for vulnerable adults, but it's balanced with their rights to privacy and confidentiality. Our first concern is with the definition of an adult at risk. As it stands, it currently includes those adults with capacity to make their own decisions. And as Andy has already talked about the guidance under which we practice, GMC guidance states that adults who have capacity are entitled to make decisions in their own interests, even if others consider them to be irrational or unwise. The bill's current definition would force GPs to act against that guidance and jeopardise the rights of adults with capacity. We believe this definition should be amended so that it only includes adults that lack capacity under the terms of the Mental Capacity Act 2016. Secondly, we also have concerns around Clause 8, which relates to this disclosure of medical records. It's imperative that the trusting and confidential relationship between a doctor and a patient is preserved, but that is at risk of being undermined with the bill as it currently stands. As it stands, medical records could be shared under a production order when consent is refused, and this can apply to patients with capacity. The bottom line is that disclosing patient information without consent of an adult who has capacity will damage the doctor-patient relationship. And if that confidentiality is eroded in any way, for example, if patients are worried that their information will not remain confidential, they will avoid getting help from their GP or another clinician. They may underreport symptoms, and that is the very last thing that we want our patients to do. It's vital that this bill's excellent intentions around improving safeguarding does not erode trust and confidentiality between a doctor and a patient, as this is the very foundation of effective care. I'm going to tell you about a patient. I've changed some details, as you won't be surprised, just to protect confidentiality and identities, but we'll call her A. She's 70 and she lives alone. She has a very complex cardiac history and declining mobility. She has ulcerating leg wounds and she requires the district nurse to call regularly to address that. They've expressed some concerns about her living conditions. Her house is full of rubbish. There is no doubt a problem with vermin, and it is clear that she is not cooking or eating properly. She's been referred to social work regarding support on a number of occasions, but she has declined this every time. I go out to see her because she's got worsening cardiac symptoms, and she minimises those when I talk to her. It's not that bad, doctor, she says. We talk about her well-being and the need for hospital intervention, a procedure that would actually improve her heart and reduce her symptoms. And importantly, we discuss the risks of not doing that, which does include sudden collapse and death. Her living conditions are absolutely a risk, and her inability to cook and self-care is also a concern for me, but ultimately not for her. A is at risk, but it is clear on this occasion, as it has been on many others, that she has full capacity. And while she understands the concerns and the risks that I articulate to her, she does not want additional help or support, nor does she want me to contact her family or external agencies to help her. I have a trusted relationship with her, but that can only continue, and I can only continue to support her as best I can within the remit of her consent. A, like every other adult with capacity, has every right to decline support, but the bill as it stands would require me to act contrary to GMC guidance and her entitlement to make those decisions in her own interests, even if I think they're unwise or indeed irrational. Undermining this right would have such a detrimental impact upon our relationship with patients. Removing the rights of adults with capacity risks fundamentally changing trust and confidentiality that patients have and rely on in their relationship with us as doctors. I would worry about patients like A that we currently support, but just as importantly, those that in the future choose to disclose harm and identify themselves at risk, but are not ready to take the steps to address this for whatever reason, and they have the capacity to make their own decisions. Patients like A need to feel heard and trusted and supported on their journey, and we should not legislate to remove their decision making nor their right to confidentiality. Ultimately, safeguarding works best when patients feel safe to speak openly. We fully support the need to protect vulnerable adults, but the bill must strike a careful balance between safeguarding and preserving the confidential, trusting relationship between a doctor and a patient. I'll stop there and we'll take some questions.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. So, you've obviously introduced something for the first time of the committee in terms of the issue of the definition of capacity and dealing with people with capacity or not. And I was going to ask to give some real life scenarios. So, Dr. Green, you talked about the example of domestic violence, and Dr. Mason, you obviously indicated the example of patient A. Honestly, I'm going to have to take a bit of time just to process all of that because it is, it throws up scenarios, contradictions of policymakers in how we do our job. But as I say, this is the first time I've heard of this. Everybody has come before us to give evidence, has supported the bill by and large with a few caveats of things. So, I suppose the obvious question for me is, was there any discussion with the department in the processing of this bill, or the indicate? No, is this an issue that the department are aware of, the people who drafted this bill?
I'm not aware of that. Certainly, at the point where this bill was drafted, there were no sort of discussions between ourselves at RCGP. Obviously, Andy may be able to speak for colleagues at BMA, but it wasn't something that we fed into, and at that stage expressed concern. It was at the point where the draft bill was indicated, in terms of giving evidence for this and submitting evidence that we read this and said, look, this actually will cause a concern. And that example, I appreciate that it was quite complex, but it's actually really common in day-to-day life. It's part and parcel of what we do almost every day. So that's, it's a conglomeration of a couple of patients, as you'll understand, but GPs up and down the country will recognise that as a challenge, and in the bill as it stands, that would create a real problem for us in terms of what we do and how we interact with our patients.
I'm coming at this from a policy point of view. So, we had people and representing social workers. They obviously are key components in this bill. GPs are another key component. So it actually surprises me that you're saying there was no interaction between yourselves and the department drafting a bill as important as this, where user. So, I'm a bit shocked to hear there's no engagement in relation to it.
We first came across this in the BMA only 2 or 3 months ago, really, and I think that was through our staff looking at the legislation, which is why we trust that this is an unintended consequence. I find it very difficult to believe that they will be drafted deliberately to remove the right from all of you sitting around this table to control your lives, which is what this is about. But please don't get the idea that we are opposing the bill. We wish to improve it to protect both patients without capacity and patients with capacity, and we believe it's quite a simple thing to do, simply by amending the definition in clause 2, because that deals with our problems with clause 4, by making it clear in clause 8 that disclosure only applies to patients who do not have capacity, and we believe that that is all that needs to happen.
Okay. Fair enough. I've a few questions, but I'm going to allow other members to come in. I'll come back at the end. Linda?
I think we need to ask the departmental officials what their thinking was, but I think I probably know where it might have been, because families come to, and I find myself in this circumstance as well, where families come to you and say, you didn't do anything, you didn't intervene, you could have stopped this, why did you not make them get treatment, you know, where maybe somebody refuses treatment where they're terminally ill or whatever. You never told us. Why didn't you tell us? We could have made them get treatment and things like that. So probably the intentions were good, but I agree, Ursula, because I deal with people every day in exactly those same type of circumstances, and I find it regularly where people will come to me and they'll disclose things that they don't want their family to know, and that's a very difficult position to be in. And sometimes I find myself thinking, I need to tell somebody this because I'm worried on how do I protect myself. So I think that is probably the position that you would be left in, you know, that if it's left as it is. So I think we need to find out from the questions I had were actually around these things, but you've superseded the questions, to be fair. So I think it's really getting the department and trying to find out where they're thinking, or do they have an alternative issue that means that it's maybe not just a simple fix, maybe there needs to be a wee bit more work done on it. But I would be very concerned at removing somebody's right to say, I don't want the help that you're offering me, but thank you very much for offering it, and breaking down that relationship, because I agree, in my constituency office I have exactly the same situation where I don't want those people not to trust me and therefore have nobody that they're talking to. Are there any circumstances where you can think of where you might think, actually, there are times when I really want to say, actually, the safeguarding issue is a bigger issue than protecting your right for me not to share your information?
I think, fundamentally, you know, you've hit the nail on the head in those really difficult conversations and how people feel. And Andy did talk about, we don't act in a paternalistic way. We make decisions with patients, and it's our job to give patients as much information and as much context as we possibly can within the context of how they are and what their understanding is. And we work with patients. So I think probably what I want the committee to take away from this is not that we would say to you, well, actually, it's up to you, you can decide, and off we go. I mean, if you were really at risk and you came to see me, say, for example, it was, you know, a scenario around domestic violence, or potentially it was a family member of yours that you were worried about and I was going out to see, it's imperative that I do my very best to talk someone through the implications of disclosure versus non-disclosure, and I would work very hard to help them understand the benefits of disclosure and the benefits of actually me being able to take another step to help them and support them, or whatever that might be. And sometimes you get to do that over time, and you, again, and I come back to this trusted relationship. If you have a trusted relationship, it is much easier for you to support a patient on a journey for them to at some point say, yes, that's okay. But you have to work at it. And again, it's that aspect of how we make sure that we allow our patients to make those decisions, but that they have all the information that is there and around them. And we do that in a confidential way. So we don't break confidences for that very, very reason. There are only a small number of examples where we would disclose information that in terms of breaking confidentiality, but it's not really around safeguarding unless other people are at risk.
Yeah.
So if others are at risk, that's a very different story.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that, again, we separate this. These are adults. It's being done onto them, not people in their surroundings, which is why, again, I give the example of someone on their own. So if, for example, A was also a carer for her husband B, who had dementia, that's a very different story, because again, there's someone without capacity who's relying on someone else. They might be coming to harm. Do you know, so this is complex, and this is why I think decisions around this are very, very important that we get right. But at all costs, we must protect the ability for people to say, I can understand what you're telling me, but no thank you.
Okay, so I suppose just as a very quick follow-on, if you don't mind, just for my own understanding, because I again totally appreciate, particularly in an issue of domestic violence where you build up that relationship and there may be over time they will trust you enough to say, I trust you enough to help me here. But if you actually disclosed, you could put their life in danger. So that's an issue. But if there were children in that home who you believe to be in danger, I'm assuming there would be a social services referral. Okay, that's just an automatic. No, look, that's all I really wanted to understand.
So there are three circumstances when doctors can legitimately divulge confidential information. The most important one is with the patient's consent, and that's what you would work for in these circumstances. Modern safeguarding is all about person-centred care and having the flexibility not to apply a one-size-fits-all approach to it. So it's with the patient's consent when it's required by law or when it's required to protect others. But those last ones are very, very rare. And just as an example, in over 30 years of medicine, I only ever once had to break confidentiality to protect others. It is a rare thing to do. You always work on getting consent and explaining and working with the patient.
Very good. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Nola?
Thank you very much for the evidence today. It has been really helpful. I have been in that circumstance before. I was a carer for my elderly grandfather. Now he's since passed, and we couldn't get him to seek treatment. But it was because of the feeling like a burden. Didn't want people always coming into the house. It wasn't part of stubbornness too, probably, but a lot of it came to not wanting to be a burden, not wanting people in the house all the time, not wanting they're too busy there, they're too. And it's a difficult one because of course they have capacity and he had capacity, but and often what we see and just from being in that sector and working quite a lot is that a lot of older people do sometimes they live alone, but they also feel like a burden on society at times. And at some point there is a balance. I agree that this is probably not the way to go, but it raises the question that there's actually a societal issue that we also need to address. Like, why would a person like that want to remain at home unmedicated or without help? And obviously this is not the right way to do that. I wanted to ask, and that's just a point I want to make, but I wanted to ask questions about where capacity meets learning disability, because many of us have worked with, for example, families from Muckamore, and a lot of their children didn't have capacity, but yet even though they didn't have capacity, those adults, their carers, for want of a better word, weren't entitled then to know many things about them too, which kind of confused me at the same time, and there's all sorts of issues going on that. But it led me to think then in this instance, at what stage does capacity then interact or overlap with learning disability? And is that already defined in legislation, or is it on a case-by-case basis at the time? I know for the purposes of this bill that it would be at that time, but if it is just learning disability, where's the kind of overlap there, and would it always just have to remain case-by-case?
It's not a case of patients always having capacity or always not having capacity, because capacity is dependent on what's being assessed, and it's also time dependent. And it's also in some ways dependent on the resources you can put into explaining things. So if you're going through a capacity assessment with someone, you would want to take great care to ensure that you had done all you possibly could to ensure that they could have whatever control that they managed over their lives. So patients don't either have capacity or don't have capacity. It's time dependent and it's decision dependent.
Absolutely, and I think if you think about adults with learning difficulties or learning disability, there is a huge spectrum in that regard, and so it is incumbent on us to make sure that we treat the individual and that we assess them at the time, depending on what it is we are trying to talk to them about or get a decision around. So it is important that we consider that aspect of it, and so there are instances where we would have patients with learning disability who have capacity to make some decisions about their care. They understand what it is that they're being told and we're asking them, and they can make a capacitous decision, and it may be around something that's a little bit more straightforward. Whenever you start to get into the complexities, that's when often that can be challenging. So I think the big sort of take home for this is to make sure that we don't have a blanket scenario that we apply to everyone. Every time someone comes to see us in our consulting room, we are making those decisions all the time about someone's understanding of what we're telling them, of what it is that we're suggesting or we're agreeing, whether they've got capacity or not. I mean, even the language we use around just normal patient interaction has to vary. So we're having to weigh that up all the time. And then if you take that into a scenario where someone potentially lacks capacity, it makes it more complex, but it still is individualised.
So then, and I'm just thinking, because it's always at the time, it's time dependent, like medical examinations. This bill is concerned with medical examinations, and what I'm just trying to find it hard at what stage during medical examinations it would be different or it would change whether a person has capacity or not for this bill. In particular, because the person, they can refuse to be examined, and a court can grant assessment for the person to be examined under this instance. But is there concern there that actually that capacity can change, and is it for each medical examination, and is that sufficient? Because I know, like delirium, for example, UTI, common, older people lack capacity at that time within 3 days back to themselves. So, and again, it comes down to this aspect of if we're assessing someone under the remit of the Mental Capacity Act. So if and again, that's a really good example. So you have someone who, as a result of an infection or a delirium, is unable to present themselves in a way that you find that they have capacity. You will make best interest decisions, and those best interest decisions may involve actually saying to someone, I'm going to examine you. Now, to be fair, again, this is, the clinical scenario around that is usually you get to examine someone and they eventually consent because actually you work with them. So it's not about forcing something on someone in any shape or form. The worry with that, and let's take delirium or that sort of fluctuating capacity out of it, if you were to remove or to add in the bit into this bill that says in adults who lack capacity, then that's kind of the question answered for us, because it doesn't then infringe or encroach on your ability to say no. Because if you come into my consulting room, and even if you lack a degree of capacity, and I want to come at you with a stethoscope and you don't want it, I'm probably not going to do that. We're going to make a decision to do something that actually meets your needs in the way that supports you, rather than me forcing something on you. So I think it's just about the care in that. And this bill, to my mind, if we were able to actually clarify that capacity issue, this bill in itself is really helpful and will be really, really good in terms of actually protecting vulnerable adults. Okay, I think that is important. I'm just thinking of section 7 there. If it was fixed, then that wouldn't be an issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Danny.
Thank you, Chair. Much the same as Nuala, and I was going to bring up the fluctuating capacity. It's something we would see quite regularly in the hospital, and I actually recognised your patient A. I think I've met her in various guises hundreds of times. But yeah, I think you've highlighted something that is very important, that we will have to take cognizance of, and certainly I think we'll have to take steps towards resolving. It does seem to go against the intentions of the bill. The intentions are quite laudable and about protecting vulnerable people. So I think highlighting this is a step a very positive step. And I think it's highlighted by yourselves as well that this could actually encourage people not to seek medical attention, and then obviously would be detrimental to their health. So, you know, it goes against the good nature of the bill. Fluctuation was the thing I was going to raise, and this is a fundamental freedom. I'm happy enough. Thank you. No questions.
If I may, lack of trust is contagious. So if people don't trust you about this, they then won't trust you about other things as well. And if they don't trust you, then their relatives and their friends don't trust you, which is why this could do enormous damage completely unintentionally.
Okay. So, I mean, obviously we're in the process of hearing evidence, so we're hearing from different ones. After each of these sessions, we will flag with the department some of the issues raised, so we'll certainly be flagging this issue with them at their earliest opportunity, and ask for some kind of response whilst we won't be engaging with the department till towards the end of it. So that's how we will be taking this forward. Alan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Ursula, I was very interested to hear your story about Patient A. And recently, I was involved in a situation with a patient A, and their living conditions. I don't know whether they were as bad as your patient A, but I suspect maybe worse. And they had to finally concede to getting a surgical procedure done that really was going to take them out of pain and really improve their quality of life. But it didn't involve anybody coming to their home. It was just they were sent to the hospital and eventually got their surgery. But the difficulties arose in the aftercare, in that they didn't want to let aftercares into their home because of the state of their home and the way they were living. And it was maybe a case of shame or embarrassment. And because they were elderly and they drifted into their living conditions. So I'm just wondering, in your patient day, when you give them your best clinical advice about what was needed to be done and how it would improve their life and so forth, did they give you any real reasons, that a fear of going into hospital, or that a fear of invasive surgery? Or do you think in the background was the real reason was their living conditions, that they were either ashamed or embarrassed about, although they let you into their house, but maybe they have a special bond with you and they didn't feel that you would be judgmental? But I'm just wondering, in your case, is it possible that it's people have, even though they have the capacity to make their own decisions, their own decision is guided by their living conditions, which is rather sad and very frustrating for people like yourself?
For all of those patient A's, all of those things that you've just said are actually the reasons why, and often it's a mixture of things. And one of the key roles that we have in trying to support people on a journey is to help explore those and understand them and break down the barriers that people might have. And I'll come back to Nila's example that she shared in terms of her family member who felt a burden, and often patients will feel that they're a burden on society, or that they don't want to annoy family, or that they've got concerns, and sometimes those are very, very relevant and real and warranted, and other times they're not. It's just a perception, and you try to chip away and you break that down and you build up the trust. And as I say, we keep coming back to this word trust. If someone trusts you, you're much more likely to be able to support them and meet them where they are. So over time, you try to understand their reasoning, and you try to work with them and say, a lot of what we do in those circumstances are not necessarily medical. It's a lot of it's a sort of understanding the social side of where people are, and perhaps explaining to them how the system works and how it's there to help and support, and that but you cannot do that in 10 minutes or 20 minutes. You can't even do it usually over a week or two. You're building that up over months and months and months, a lifetime sometimes with people. And then sometimes you get a bit of a chink and they'll say, oh, okay, I hear what you're saying. I'm going to go with that, thank you, because you've built up the trust. And again, I come back to, if we damage that, then those kind of conversations don't really get the opportunity to start to grow and develop. So again, part of our role is often that sort of aspect of, and you've heard me talk about continuity of care again. This is a really, really good example about how building trust and confidentiality in a continuous relationship over time can actually mean the difference between someone getting support and someone not getting support. So it's about trying to protect that more than anything, Alan.
Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Chair.
Colm.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation today. I think it's been, if anything, refreshing not to hear people talking about the CCTV and the other issues. It's always just been the same issues that people have come with, and it is a different one, and it's thrown a bit of a curveball. But I was just interested very quickly, just in terms of, do you think that under Clause 2, where they have the definition as an adult at risk, is where A is unable to protect their own well-being, is the point that you're making there that if they choose not to worry about their own well-being, and is that definition where they're saying that they're unable to rather than choosing to, is it, do you feel that just if that clause is tightened up that would help it? Because I presume, and it is a presumption which we can examine further with the authors of the legislation, that they're sort of suggesting that if you're unable to look after your own well-being, therefore you need somebody to come in and do that, and that if you had the capacity to say, I'm happy to be in the state that I'm in, well then you are able to look after your own well-being. It's a sense that you're not, it's whenever somebody is unable to. So is it that you would like to see tightened up?
So I think there is a difference between unable and not wanting to, or being able. So I will try and give you an example. So let's think about someone who needs help with their medication. Okay, so say for example I've got a sight issue and I don't know whether pills A, B or C are the ones that I need to take morning, noon or night. And often that can be helped with aids, or say for example it's getting a bit more difficult, you've got a bit of arthritis, so you need a carer to come in and do that. Okay, and you decide, well actually I don't want a carer, I'm going to take my chances and try to take my meds as best I can. So I am unable, but I am also not consenting. And because I have capacity and I understand the implications of that, which might be that I lose my sight, or it might be that I fall, or it might be that something else happens, as long as I understand all of that and that's been explained to me and the offer of support is there and ongoing and continuous, then it's okay for me to make that decision. You might not think that that's the right thing for me to do, but I am unable, but also not willing. Does that explain it?
Yeah, I think it's good, because I think if we ask the department about this and they come back and say, oh no, what we mean by unable, it's important that we know that they're
what actually is read is really important.
I think the bottom line is that capacitous patients with capacity do just need to be removed from this, because by doing so you won't be removing care from those people, because the caring actions that Ursula has described would still be there. So we just need to make it clear that this only applies to people who don't have capacity.
I presume it could be similar for you if you have a patient that you prescribe them drugs, medication that they need to make them better. If they refuse to take it, if they're making that decision of their own free will, that's their choice. But actually this here would nearly capture them and say, no, we need to get them in because they're not able to look after themselves. And then you're in this scenario, well, do you force them to take the drugs? And
that's why, as it's written, this would open a can of worms, which could actually see a ripple effect, which is huge beyond the whole aspect of trust. But it's how we actually allow people to live their lives. Every one of us that has capacity, it's if I can choose to get into my car and drive away from here at 100 miles an hour, it's not the right thing to do. And if I crash and hit you or hit a tree, I've made that decision. But actually, we're on a slippery slope if we start to take away, decision making from people who have the capacity to do so.
I'm delighted to be part of a conversation where being pedantic is a reasonable thing to do. It's not normally what we're accused of, but thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Go ahead, Al.
Just a question, Dr. Mason. At the last session that we had there with the trusts and BASW, they highlighted in quite some detail about the pressures that they currently have, and they talked about the training that they will be required, training specifically by BASW, that they are looking front-loaded rather than being done after the bill has been implemented. Do you envisage any additional pressures within a already hugely pressurised GP system And do you envisage any additional training will be required by GPs going forward as the bill is implemented?
The introduction of a bill like this would obviously involve additional training and support for any frontline clinician who's involved in protecting people who are vulnerable. So I think that is an important thing to highlight. I think as well we would need to ensure that there is, that not only do GPs who are going to be engaging with patients understand the implications of the bill and their duty within that, how we interact with our colleagues across the system, for example, our colleagues in social work in particular, because a lot of that would be engagement between social work and ourselves and or other clinicians elsewhere across the system. So there will of course be a training element to this, because currently as we understand what we do it within the guidance of GMC and the current legislation that sits around consent and capacity and all of that. And what we found, and I'll use an example of the introduction of the Mental Capacity Act in the 2016 Mental Capacity Act, there is still training gaps and deficits around the roles and responsibilities of enacting that. So I think it would be very important that, when this legislation passes, that actually we have cognizance of what is needed to make sure that folk can hit the ground running, that they can protect the people that need protected, and they're making the right decisions around that. So yes, is the simple answer. Yeah.
And I think Dr. Green has already covered it, that there has been no discussions so far with the department in terms of that additional support that will be. Okay.
Thank you. So, Dr. Mason, Dr. Green, appreciate you coming before us. We will definitely pick up on this issue and alert the department to it.
We very much appreciate you listening to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Okay, members, we're just going to go straight then to oral briefing from the department, and this is on the December monitoring and also the 3-year budget plan. So can I refer members to papers at tab 7, page 70 of the main pack, and also page 2 of the table papers. Waiting our guest, Andrew. So can I welcome Mr. David Keenan, Interim Financial Director within the department, Ms. Danielle Mallen, Head of Financial Management, Paul Montgomery, Investment Director, and Ms. Catherine Fitzpatrick, Head of Capital Resources, and Ms. Nicola Shields, Interim Head of Financial Planning, all within the Department of Health. So you're all very welcome to the committee. We've got your paper. I'm going to hand over to yourself just for some brief introductory remarks, and then we'll take questions.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'll start by making a few opening remarks, providing an update on the 25-26 resource budget, the impact that this will have on the multi-year budget, and then hand over to Paul to cover the capital position. You'll be aware at the start of this financial year, Health was facing a funding gap of some 600 million, which included an estimated 200 million for HSC pay. In May, our Permanent Secretary briefed the committee that he had established a systems financial management group to drive efficiencies and cash release and savings to reduce this funding deficit. A number of work streams were developed to drive value across all aspects of our system and in tandem work towards reducing our cost base, making it more affordable and sustainable going forward. The plan was to deliver 300 million savings internally and seek help from the executive to cover the remaining 300 million. To date, Health has received 25 million support from the executive in June monitoring. To put that into context, at this time last year, Health had received some 472 million support. The department has identified savings plans of some 285 million to date, but despite these efforts, we're unable to fully eliminate the overspend. This is not unexpected, as cashable in-year savings of this scale were always going to be challenging in achieving the timeline at the end of this financial year. You'll be aware that the Executive has approved the Minister's direction on the 25-26 HSC pay award and agreed that Health will have first call on up to 100 million of the funding available in December monitoring. However, this will still leave the department facing a significant funding gap. Even if the 100 million is confirmed, it will only address up to half the pay pressure, and as a minimum it will still leave the department needing to find a further 100 million for pay and an estimated further 100 million to break even. While we continue to make every effort to reduce this figure through further efficiencies and savings, our assessment is clear: without further support, which is not currently expected, we will not be able to break even. Given the commitments the Executive made on pay, DOF did not invite departments to submit resource bids in December monitoring, or we would have been bidding for the remaining shortfall. Therefore, in December monitoring, we've only bid to cover our depreciation requirement for this year with a bid of an additional £10 million. Turning now to the multi-year budget. You will be aware the Executive are planning to agree a multi-year budget for the next 3 years, which ideally would allow us to prioritise spending and investment more effectively in the long term. However, given that any overspend this year may be deducted from our 26-27 budget, this will make the next financial year at least as equally as challenging as the current one. While it's not possible to provide a definitive assessment on our future funding position until a settlement for future years has been reached, it's likely we will not have all the resources to do everything we want to do or everything that needs to be done. And I hand you over to Paul to cover the capital position.
Okay, thank you, David. The capital budget position is under less pressure than the resource budget in the current financial year, but faces similar challenges in future years. In 25-26, the opening capital budget for the department was £391 million, which was reduced to £379 million in June monitoring, mainly due to the surrender of a reduced requirement in respect of the Mother and Children's Hospital project. At December monitoring, a further £30.3 million reduced requirement is being declared in respect of this project. This is linked to the changes to the water system in the new Children's Hospital that are currently under consideration following the experience of the maternity hospital. As a result, some of the equipment originally planned for procurement, purchase and vesting in the current financial year may no longer be suitable following the water system redesign. The lower than originally projected requirement for this project in the current financial year means that additional funding will be required in future years. From the briefing paper, the committee will see that 2 capital bids with a combined value of £31.8 million have been submitted as part of December monitoring. The first is £26.3 million for the replacement of servers, IT infrastructure, equipment and devices across the health and social care sector to reduce the risk of systems failing with potentially significant consequences for the delivery of care. The second is for £5.5 million for backlog maintenance in the context of the estimated £1.6 billion backlog maintenance requirement. The level of bids submitted as part of December monitoring were based on the pressures identified by arm's length bodies and business areas, the funding available from within internal sources and the expected capacity to utilise the additional funding at this time in the financial year. Turning to future years, we submitted capital bids with a combined value of £3 billion as part of the budget process, which will cover a 4-year period, 26-27 to 29-30 for capital DEL. Based on the Department of Health's share of the allocations made in the budget process last year, the expectation would be that we will receive between £1.6 and £1.8 billion over the next budget period. The scale of the funding gap means that, as with the resource budget, difficult decisions will need to be made with priority given to inescapable pressures and limited scope to take forward other projects over the 4-year period. The precise details will all depend on the outcome of the budget process, which will inform the development of a 10-year capital investment plan for the Department of Health. This plan will set out the projects to be funded over the next decade to provide the health and social care sector with a degree of assurance and clarity regarding the capital funding position. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There's probably a lot to go through there. Just in terms of the savings, so the trusts have made savings of 59 million in phase 1, 55 phase 2, and SPPG have made savings of 43 million. So I suppose the obvious question to ask with regard to those savings is their impact on frontline services, particularly the SPPG, who are a commissioning service. So that saving, I mean, how does that equate to services not being commissioned or an impact on patient outcome?
Basically, a lot of that is basically the savings that they've been given up is just less demand. Out there, they would hold budgets for things like high-cost drugs and that as well, which are very demand-led. And that, so that would make up a contribution towards the savings that they've delivered, as well as that there's been slippage in recruitment and that, and then internally within SPPG there's been like they've been doing their own recruitment control and managing vacancies and that.
Okay.
So there shouldn't be in fact the savings that I've really mentioned there shouldn't be the impact on frontline services should be minimal.
Oh, and I was going to ask that because somewhere else, paragraph 10, I'm thinking, where it's talking about, we're expecting further reduced requirements on demand-led programs, which should reduce. Yeah. So, I was amazed when I read that, and I'm amazed even that you're saying it there, because I can't see any aspect of our health service that is facing a reduced demand. Every day it's more people, it's more issues, it's lack of capacity, it's lack of work. No, everywhere I look as the chair of the health committee, never mind just being an ordinary MLA, I see more demand. So I'm really confused and shocked by that language.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're right. As demand is continuing to outstrip supply, but within when you consider like the size of the health budget, there will be certain budgets will be for specific things. Not there too. Yeah. So for those specific things, you can have a reduction in demand too, and then it comes to when if that demand's down, what is the choices? What is done with that funding? Not there. And because if we were in a situation at the minute where we had a balanced budget, that reduction in demand in that service would be taken and be really switched, immediately to basically to fund where demand was outstripping supply in another service. But where we are at the minute, the department is attempting to break even. So we're turned over every stone. So basically, something that basically at the beginning of April looked like it was needed, and that. But maybe there's delays in terms of governance, in terms of developments of business cases, recruitment of staff, and that. That has meant then that budget has become available because we're in a situation at the minute where we're actually trying to manage a deficit. We're pulling those budgets back to basically address the funding gap.
Okay, and I understand that. Health is like every other department is a tight budget, so it's really important that we're looking in detail at each service to see. But it was just the phrase about demand led that really shocked me. And 43 million from a commissioning service seems a particularly large amount of savings. Across the trust, big savings. It would be. I think it would be useful for me and
get a breakdown of that.
To get a breakdown of that, just so we can actually see the detail of that, and it might make more sense when we do that. So I would appreciate that. Yeah. Just
a lot of it is, will be one off. As I said, it'll be one off. There'll be savings for this year that, won't be available.
Okay. And because I say you talked about drugs. Every day my constituency officers are getting letters from constituents who are not being given access to drugs that they think that would help them. So, as I say, the detail I think would be useful. Just moving on then to the waiting lists. And I know this is a conversation we've had previously, and we've had it with the Permanent Secretary, and we've had it with the Minister about the 215 million and the 80 million that was earmarked versus ring-fenced, and the fact that it's, according to this and the Minister, not necessary in terms of beating the programme for government targets, which may in itself be good, but I don't think we should be drawing a line in the sand saying when we get there we'll stop treating people or stop dealing with people who are in the waiting list. So I think a lot of people will be concerned that money, whether it was earmarked or ring-fenced for a specific reason, like dealing with waiting lists, and we're not going to do much more than we could do to reduce. Because the figures are out. There's some reduction in waiting lists, but there are still an awful lot of people on our waiting list.
Yeah. Probably the best if I break down. That's the 215 million that was in the budget. 85 million of that was to address red flag, cancer, time critical patients. That is going ahead. That is fully committed, And in relation to that funding, at the minute that has delivered something like 122,000 additional interventions. So you accepted the 70,000 that was in the programme for government. So that alone has already exceeded that. And of course the department will want to do more.
Sorry, I mean,
and then in terms of the sort of if you take the rest of that funding as well, the 50 million was to address long waits. Again, that 50 million is fully committed, and I think sort of the latest figures is something like there's been a 29% fall in reduction in outpatient waits in those long waits, and there's been a 41% fall in treatment waits for people waiting over 4 years. But the department does want to do more. In relation to the 80 million, the 80 million was to basically build capacity within the health service to address waiting lists. In total the 215, but there were three sort of distinct amounts. And within that 80 million, the executive, when they allocated that 80 million to the department, they did give the flexibility in that if that couldn't be fully utilised, and that it could be used to address other pressures in the health system. So I think it got to the stage in the year when when the department's looking at hyper progressing and say, obviously you want to do more, but we were achieving the programme for government target. So it did become that sort of pot of money to become, is there a possible opportunity here? And that there too, can it be fully utilised within this year? The only thing to bear in mind is actually the funding wasn't allocated recurrently, so it wasn't, and to build capacity within the health service, really what you're talking about is basically recruiting teams of staff and out there to address a waiting list. So if you don't have that funding recurrently as well, the department then is actually would actually had to overcommit on the basis that funding may be available the next year. Anywhere where you sort of get staffing costs, I mean, you really do want to guarantee that funding is going to be recurrent.
These are political decisions. So, you talked about the red flag, and we're the 122,000, and we're definitely reducing that. But red flags we still have people who aren't being met by their targets. And that's the point I'm making. So I'm not denying the fact that the Department of Health will meet or may meet its programme for government targets. What I'm saying is, we shouldn't be stopping at a line when we meet our targets, particularly when we have people on red flags. And going back, and my narrative of the programme for government discussion, I'm not an executive, so I don't know, but at that time I can remember, and it's only a month ago, where the minister said he needed 215 million to meet that requirement of reducing waiting lists. So that was around February, March, April time, where the health minister said, I need 215 million. The executive gave him 215 million, and a few months later we're being told, actually, there's 80 million that we asked for, that we said we needed, and we don't need to do what we said we needed it for. Is that a correct interpretation?
Well, the other issue was that actually that funding had already been given to the department in the draft budget, and it was within our baseline. And what happened then when the final budget came out? It then was ring fence for waiting lists. When that funding was given in the draft budget, that funding was already committed to other services. So the ring fencing of that 165 million caused the department a problem. In terms of the 85, the department had already committed something like 76 million to address the red flag and time critical patients, so it wasn't as big an issue, but it wasn't new money, for the department at that stage. But when you move from where we were with our financial plan and where we were in the final budget, that wasn't new money. So that was always going to give us a problem in terms of that was actually creating a gap, because either we extracted that from the other services and directed it towards waiting list time. That actually would have been the choice the minister would have had to make.
Okay.
At that time. But the department will, in terms of the programme for government, target, the part, I've mentioned there about the 122,000 interventions. That's where they are now. The department will still drive, to basically to improving that as well.
Don't get me
will grow.
I'm not negating the good work that's going on and the fact that there is good. I'm just saying that most people out there will wonder why the department, when they have this 80 million earmarked for a particular thing, which most of the public think is crucially important, is now no longer going to that when it could do so much more.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm making. And I mean, that was obviously a political decision. Just moving on to the capital. So point 19, you're talking about 26.3 million going to IT equipment, stuff like that there. So I've raised a number of times the Auditor General's report back a few months with regard to CT scanners, MRI scanners. Is there much of that 26 million going to replacing, renovating, rejuvenating CT scanners and MRI scanners across the trust areas?
Yes, because that's money that we're bidding for to DOF.
Yeah.
There was also money before bidding to DOF. As I mentioned, we were looking at our internal resources and the pressures that have been identified internally rather than having to go to DOF. So we've allocated, I think, £7 million to imaging diagnostics, which will include CT scanners, etc.
And then a thing that came up during my visit to the Mater Hospital there last week, where I was engaging with a number of patients and care workers who use the hospital, who were talking about the CT scan and MRI scans there. And I mean, I think there's some group of philanthropists who are prepared to fund equipment in that particular hospital, and I assume that's an issue that maybe happens elsewhere. How can the department use, or can the department use or avail of philanthropy or groups out there who are prepared to donate money for a particular issue like a CT scan or an MRI scanner?
Well, it's mainly for the trust to deal with.
Okay.
And they have their own charitable foundations. And there's an issue, for example, the haematology project, that I think the Friends of Cancer or something are willing to make a significant contribution to that project. So it's certainly within the I think each trust has its own charitable foundation.
Okay.
The money is allocated through there, and then that is in part used for that sort of thing. So, but if there was sort of Bill Gates wanted to come and offer us 100 million for a capital project, we would not say no. There would be a way found.
Fair enough. The 390 was the initial budget for the capital, and there's only 70 million of it spent. I'm right in saying that?
Only 70 million has been spent. I'm sorry, I don't recognise. Where's your source of your figures?
Oh, sorry, not spent. So there's 390 million, 70 not spent. So we had this discussion with the Permanent Secretary and the Minister at that time when we were discussing this about certain capital projects. There was a bit of interaction between yourselves and the Department of Finance. Where are we at in relation to that conversation?
I'm still not sure.
So
is this in the briefing?
There's capital projects like Birch Hill,
yes.
Like the Alton McGalvin's Children's Hospital. You know, there was money set aside initially for those projects that wasn't allowed to be spent because of conversations with the Department of Finance.
There's a potential capital resource switch.
Yeah.
Well, it was at the, I think of a briefing that we sent at the start of the year. We talked about £46 million that was being held for a range of partially committed projects, including Birch Hill. What then we looked, and it was to be subject to a review. So what we looked at, the profile of these projects, because these projects go over a number of years. So it's not just making sure they're affordable this year, it's to make sure that they're affordable in each year, because you obviously can't just stop and start the funding. So when we looked at the profile, these profiles, for the capital projects, they tend to start small, a couple of £1 million, but then they rapidly grow and then stop. So the projects that looked affordable this year are not affordable next year and the year after. So what we decided was that those 46 million, there were some projects we could fund, and the ministers agreed to fund the Finton Fire Station, the Cushendall Fire Station, the haematology project, and the Antrim Area Electrical Infrastructure project, leaving £30 million, which was to be then, because of the pressures on the Resourcedale side, it was to be held for a capital to Resourcedale switch, as mentioned, I think in the Resourcedale paper. However, subsequently, the scale of the pressures that we faced on the capital Dale side, particularly on digital projects, the diagnostic project you referred to before, meant that we then required the £30 million for capital projects, and as well as that, to do the capital resource switch requires approval from Treasury and or approval at the executive level, but there wasn't the spare no department has the spare resource del to allow the counterparty for the capital to resource switch. So what was decided subsequent to the paper, the resource del position being sent to you, it was decided that it would be best to allocate that £30 million. So that money has now been allocated primarily to digital projects. You're going to ask, well, what about the Birch Hill and all the other projects? They will now be considered as part of the development of the capital investment plan, and to see what projects we can fund over the coming years within the available budget. Of course, that will the key point in this will be what's the budget outcome for the Department of Health over the coming years, and that will determine the profile of how soon we can take forward these projects. The Minister is exceptionally keen on a lot of these projects, and we're keen to have them take forward as early as possible. But if the funding's not there, we simply can't do it.
And that moves me on to my last point of questioning is the 3-year budget. So I heard the Finance Minister in the Chamber the other day saying that he had been engaging with the Department, expected to take a draft budget to the Executive the side of Christmas. I think he said, hope not misquoting my party colleague, but I'm pretty sure that's what he said. So, we're not far off this side of Christmas, so I'm assuming the Department have sent in a draft budget to the Department. In terms of engagement, what can we expect to see with regard to improvements to service as part of the 3-year budget? In terms of work, I'm thinking things that were always held back because of workforce planning, some of the things that we've talked about here.
Well, that's been bid for, so it has been. In terms, as part of the 3-year budget, we submitted our return in September there. So we've bid, the Department's bid for all the what we'd call our inescapable pressures to cover the likes of pay, inflation, national living wage, and that. And as well as that, we've also submitted high priority bids for bids that would support the you've heard of the Department's reset plan. So we've bid for, there's 9 high priority bids that went, which are all linked to the reset plan. Things like primary care reform, social care reform. That includes the reform of adult social care, adult protection bill, workforce strategy, more funding for workforce strategy, mental health reform, acute services, and then some on secondary care in terms of improving diagnostic capacity and imaging and pathology services.
In terms of pay, because the Minister, I think, has given a commitment that he's not going to do like he did this year, where when he gets his budget, he's going to give a commitment to deal with the pay issues. So, will we expect that commitment to be lived up to with regard to healthcare staff, but also in particular compared to social care staff who were promised the minimum living wage and that hasn't been delivered upon yet? Is that built into the budgets now moving forward?
It's built into the plan at the minute. It's built into the plan at the minute, but obviously that will depend on actually when we see the outcome of the budget. But that is, you've made clear that is one of the Minister's priorities at the minute, is to address those at the outset. So, both of them are built into the financial plan, but it will very much depend on what funding is available about what we can do.
Okay, going to move on to others then. Colm.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I know health is the toughest probably department in terms of work, and looking after the money in that department is probably the toughest part of the toughest job. So thank you for the information. And I want to maybe just ask you, on one of the areas that's remaining is about the capital on that side, and it's about the work for the backlog and maintenance. It's saying in there that it's sitting at the minute at 1.6 billion, which is equating to almost half of the value of the estate. And I know that last year you made bids for 20 million and that was unsuccessful, and in the monitoring rounds here you're looking for 5.5 million for estates. And given that the health services are only going to be as good and as safe as the places that we actually deliver them in, I was wondering if you could detail some of that breakdown, because 5.5 million of 1. Whatever billion, it works out at about 0.3% that we're actually looking to try and fix up those buildings and that backlog. So what do we do with these buildings?
Well, we were very careful about bidding at this time of the year because there's a risk we ask for the money and then we are left with a big underspend at the end of the year. So what we did before we bid for it, we checked with the LBs about what could you spend this on, make sure that you could spend it. So that's why it is 5.5 billion. We would like to have bid for more. It is a large, we are bidding for quite a large amount of money. We bid for, as I said, we did bid for 20 million in June monitoring. We didn't get that. So, it's all great for us to say, put in a £50 million bid, but A, we won't get it, and B, I doubt whether we could spend it. Over the budget period, what we're looking at in terms of our bids for our capital bids, we're £30 million each year. So in terms of the specific project, I don't have the detail with me. We can provide that to you, but we will check with the trust and say, here's additional funding. Can you spend it? And they'll obviously, we would hope that they would allocate it to the most critical projects.
In terms just of the own information that you've provided there, I think you said that 60% of the estate is not fully compliant with statutory regulations. What does not compliant with statutory regulations mean? Because I know if I have an office which we run on behalf of, we're given the money from the Assembly, we have to have statutory obligations in place, we have to have insurances in place, we have to have health and safety. Is there massive amounts of our estate not compliant if 60% isn't?
I'm afraid that's a question for our health estates colleagues. They're the ones who make the assessment, and there's a state of the state report that will provide a lot of detail on the background to that, which we can provide to you. Well, I'm sorry, I just deal with funding, not on that assessment as to the estate. But it's up to the architects, quality surveyors have specific standards for it, for the estate, and then they go around and make sure, and then that's the amount of funding that it would be required to bring the estate, each sort of piece of accommodation or land up to the required standard.
It's just the report that we have here says that 20% is deemed unacceptable. That's obviously it's not your side of the house, but you're providing us with that report, and it just seems. It would seem weird for us to get a report that says that 20% of the works that need done within our health estate is unacceptable without asking that question, and maybe we could ask for some breakdown of what that actually is, because I think maybe unless there's a difference in the interpretation of unacceptable, but if something is unacceptable by a statutory requirement, and that's the buildings and the places that we're actually asking our public to go in and get their healthcare in, I think there's something really fundamental there that we need to address, and that we would need to find that. So maybe if we could get a wee breakdown on just what those unacceptable those unacceptable compliances are, so that we could maybe have a look at them to determine if we need to investigate that further. I'll maybe finish with an easier question then. I'd ask the Minister about my MRI scanner for the Down Hospital. Where does that sit in the... I've been asking that for the 10 years that I've been here, and I keep getting told it's either it's a capital bid, it's waiting on staffing within the trust, or that there's a bid from the trust to SPPG, but it's just, I know that there are so many people that are reliant on getting that type of scanning that are having to drive right past a fully functioning hospital to go to another one in order to get that, and it's been on the list for so long, and given the amount of monies that are there, the cost of it seems quite small in comparison. So whereabouts does it sit, and what are the next stages in the process for that?
So it's one of the new diagnostic schemes, so I think it's approximately 10 million, that scheme. Is that right?
Yeah.
So
again, it depends. It is a new project. The priority will be on the committed projects, the inescapable pressures that we really have to spend, and on the partially committed projects. If we are only going to get 1.6 to 1.8 billion pounds compared to 3 billion pounds, which would include the new projects, it would be hard to see that we'll be able to take many of those projects forward. But obviously we'll be looking at them on an ongoing basis and try to take forward as many as possible. But the financial position simply means that there's a lot of good projects here that we simply will not be able to afford to take forward.
Can I ask you just to come back to me on that specific project, just on the basis that I don't think it's new. This is, I say, I'm here 10 years, and I've been speaking about the MRI scanner at the Down for 10 years, and at different versions of the committee we've been told that it's been in different places. So if we could get just maybe a wee resume of where it is and what the next stages would be, whether it's going to happen or not, but at least if we just know what those stages are, would be very useful.
Whenever we call new projects, it's probably a misnomer. It's not committed projects.
Oh, okay, right, yeah, fair enough. Okay, so it could be old, but I get you.
There's stuff here I recognise from past.
Yeah, get you. Okay, listen, that was the easy question. Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Linda.
Thank you, Chair. And you've already asked the question around the social care workers, so I think we do need to understand what's happening there. But just as a follow-on to Colin's question around the buildings and estates, so do you know if there is any maintenance money or money being spent on buildings and estates that is for keeping unused sites or unused buildings safe and maintained on the estate?
We wouldn't have. It will be part of their. Well, it's difficult to know. There's different types of maintenance depending on the form of it. Some of it will be resource spending. Some of it will be capital.
Well, look, I understand that, and well, I would like to get detail on that. If there are unused sites or buildings that are sitting that are is costing the health service money because it was a significant problem for PSNI. And they're only getting to a point now where they're getting rid of those sites, and if that is an issue, we need to know. We need to understand if we are throwing good money after bad, and if there's a potential maybe to make money out of those sites. So I think it's important for us to understand that. Just in relation to the savings on the new drug treatments due to the reduced prices, which is great. The recent pharmaceutical agreement between the US and the British government, is that likely to have any impact on the prices here? Are you aware? You may not be able to answer that again. I'm content if you come back to me in writing.
Yeah, we're not aware of anything yet, but I mean, not aware of where we could actually assess the impact yet. But I mean, it's on the department's radar.
Okay, and then, are you aware if in this budget it's been factored in? Maybe new drugs. I'm particularly thinking about ones that have recently been approved by NICE and are not being made available to patients here. I have a specific issue around drugs for women with breast cancer, and I mean these are life enhancing, life extending and potentially life saving drugs for young women with young families. So is that factored in the new drugs that are maybe coming online that are not currently being provided?
In terms of what we've bid to deal with at the minute, we have factored in an amount for new drugs as advised by that SPPG in that area. But I couldn't give you the assurance of that particular drug that you've mentioned.
I understand that. I don't expect you to, but could we maybe get or ask for some detail, Chair, from SPPG? Are they including in that only drugs that they have decided at this point to commission, or do you think they've put in a contingency for drugs that might come online?
Once it reaches a stage of the NICE guidance, where the NICE have basically cleared it for use in Northern Ireland, I think that's when it gets included. They look at the timeline and that too.
The department are up next week from a pharmacy point of view, so we can actually flag up these issues so that they can answer these questions.
Yes, if we can flag it so in advance of the meeting, so that they can have the answers when they come. That would be helpful. Okay, no, that's fine, Chair. That's my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nola.
Thank you very much for the presentation so far. I think just to reflect, like, it is a particularly difficult financial situation the entire executive is in, therefore each department. It's deeply frustrating. That's why, as an executive partner, Alliance had queried the ring fencing of another departments, no matter the good intention behind it. So we'll recognise that it is difficult and frustrating whenever something is ring fenced but you're actually already spending on it. So we understand the difficulties that arise there, but I have been listening then what you're saying about the kind of not repurposing but changing the 70 odd million for that to be spent, and then savings elsewhere, and then you also use the word efficiencies, and so I'm just trying to get clear in my head what is savings and what is efficiencies, and what would the kind of balance be with regards to each. I'm not looking for an exact percentage, obviously I don't expect you to have that in your head, but is it more just on the savings side rather than on efficiency side?
I would say it's more on the savings side in terms of the savings delivered too. Depends as well what you classify, as efficiency as well. I mean, there's recruitment control has been built into a lot of the savings as well. But in terms of recruitment control, maybe if you're sort of controlling your sort of your administration staff, there's an argument there that that's you being more efficient. If you're basically containing the administration costs within a service, it's a saving, but you're actually also being more efficient. Of using that resource. So it's a difficult distinction to make, but I would say generally what has been generated so far within the savings plans that are in the department at the minute would fall more on savings than efficiencies.
Has there been much work then on what can be done better or differently in order to produce those efficiencies? Because it's not, we don't get a lot of detail in that, and I'm not talking about needing hundreds of pages, but actually just detail on what can be done better to produce efficiency savings.
In terms of the Systems Financial Management Group that the Permanent Secretary has created, some of the work streams within that there are looking at things like skills mix, labour skills mix, unwarranted clinical variation, diagnostics. These are all things that basically has been identified through a number of finance summits where the Permanent Secretary's got together all the trusts, looking at areas where they believe that efficiencies could be delivered. At the minute,
new Perm Sec set up. So this is a new thing.
Mm-hmm. So this is part of his this is part of the work streams within the Systems Financial Management Group that he created. In terms of what they're delivering to date in year, we haven't seen a lot of traction in that, but the drive is still there because part of the sort of the work streams within the Systems Financial Management Group was not only just to deliver cash savings that we could reduce this year, but it's basically to also look at the long term. How can we bring the cost base of the HSC down? So that's three areas that sort of I can immediately think of that the department and is looking to drive efficiencies out of too, and we'd hope that basically by when you're moving into 26, 27, we'd start to see some outcomes, some benefits coming out of those of work streams like that too.
I think that is
and again,
important.
Another one of those is the procurement work stream as well too. There's a procurement work stream as well. Again, that's another one that there hasn't been a lot of traction on to date, but is one that we see as that in the longer term should be able to deliver efficiencies that help reduce the cost base.
I think that is important because with so much spend on health and the focus being on in-year savings, that actually something that we do say over and over is actually just the way in which we're doing things. It must be so wrong that we are spending more and more money, not having better outcomes, but yet still asking for even more money. So it's particularly frustrating that it's just now this new Perm Sec who said, well, actually we need to get a hold on things and deliver those efficiencies. So it's almost like a better late than never, but still important that it has to be done. And then
the drive now to accept that things need to change and the cost base of
why wasn't it before? What
I think there was always been attempts before. I think the Perm Sec's brought in things that he's seen work in other jurisdictions. I think
just an acceptance.
I think the department has always tried to deliver more in that there, but we've come up against obstacles in that, to do that. But I think now there is a recognition that we can't go on doing things as we have been doing in the past, and that things need to change your thinking. Things need to be done differently.
And are those obstacles being removed? Sorry if that means people. I don't mean that to come off rather flippant, but if it's like a culture or things like, have those obstacles been removed, or are they still posing a challenge? And are they political too? Obviously, big. I understand transformation is a political one, but there's other ones too.
Yeah, too. I think that'll come out as we drive this process forward. Have we got the obstacles out of the way? Because the only way we'll be able to achieve this is by removing them. and you know, and say that, and the department is determined at the minute to do that.
And I think we're determined also to keep an eye and work with on how we can actually support that too, because I think that's very important. And then a part of efficiency, I guess, is transformation, like I mentioned. And it said in your paper that you provided, I don't know where, about, you know, the new multi-year transformation bids and how additional money per year is going to go into that. And we know MDTs is something that's being rolled out under that transformation bid, but is there any other, anything else that the department has put as a first priority on that transformation?
We've bid. We've bid with 2 bids in transformation that are through to the final allocation. You know, at the moment this year, one's for e-prescribing, and then one's for transforming family support. So we're hopeful that those, that, you know, I mean, that is the positive at the moment. You know, that 2 areas like that there, you know, have made it right through to the you know, that's been now up to the Department of Finance and that there, to basically, and the executive to basically agree that.
What do you mean by transforming family support?
And that, sorry, I haven't got the detail.
Okay. Yes, I can follow that up, that's fine, don't worry, I don't expect you to. That's all I have for my questions for now, thank you.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions I was going to ask have already been asked, but again, I suppose that shows we're all thinking around the same things. I find this incredibly complex, this stuff, but there's a few things that I just wanted to ask you just about to make it make more sense in my head. I know it's recently been announced here today, and we've heard about extra procedures that have been done on waiting lists, and the waiting list procedures are falling. We've actually heard today that there are now more people in Northern Ireland who are on waiting lists than ever before. I don't know if you're aware of the figure, 542,451 people at the end of September on a waiting list to see a consultant for the first time. So we have removed 73 million from the waiting list programme, and yet we've more people who are now on waiting lists. I can see, and I know constituents of mine who are waiting huge, long periods of time and spending large amounts of money on going private now instead. So we can see the actual impact that this is having on people. Were you aware of that trend, of the amount of people who are continuing to grow on waiting lists?
No, I wasn't.
No. Okay, it just been announced today, but it was the figure from the end of September, so they are Department of Health figures.
Yeah.
But you weren't aware, no?
Not, it wasn't something that I was aware in terms of that. So.
Okay. But obviously good to hear previously that more and more procedures are being done, and we have, if I heard you correctly, we've met the programme for government target of 70,000?
Yeah, we went way beyond it. And obviously the department wants to do more. I mean, the department's determined to do more between now and the end of the year too. You know, and you know, it's unfortunate that you know, that lists and people are continuing to wait too. I mean, the only thing I can say again is about the 73.5 million is that it, you know, it was a build capacity, you know, that amount too. So there was, you say, how much we could have done with that money in year too, as well. You know, there was too. You know, I mean, obviously we wanted to do more, but it was getting. We also have a, you know, the department and the permanent secretary has an objective to try and achieve break even as well, and try and achieve what he can to do. You know, and we were given the flexibility by the Department of Finance and the executive, and out there on that funding, basically to divert it and out there to if it couldn't be fully utilised too, you know. But I mean, you know, I take your point, yeah, that, you know, it's disappointing those figures, you know, continue to rise, but not there. But you know, the department is determined to sort of, you know, address the waiting list and bring them down.
Okay. Does it suggest that the target was maybe too low if you have been able to go significantly beyond it, as you've said?
That would be an understandable interpretation.
Okay. What should it have been?
Beyond me, I wouldn't be informed. I wouldn't be well informed to set it.
But good to hear. You know, obviously that bit is a success. We hear about 3-year budgeting all the time. What are the savings as you see them? You know, where are those areas?
Sorry?
We hear about 3-year budgeting. The Minister brings it up all the time. What are the key areas where you can achieve significant savings?
That is still being developed at the minute, so it is too. I mean, at the minute, we do expect 26-27 to be a very difficult position, and that, given the fact that that any overspend this year is likely to come off us next year. So it is, next year is going to...
so far? 100 million so far?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, once we get confirmation of what funding is available from December monitoring, what that'll set what the balance of pay is, what we're going to effectively overspend on, and that too. You're talking upwards of 200 million, and that there that's going to come off next year's budget too. So the department's very aware, yes, that next year we are going to have to generate savings internally to basically do anything we want to do. But in terms of plans at the minute, they're still being developed.
Okay. With the pay deal, I just want to ask you clarity. How was that not factored in at the start of this year? Obviously, the pay uplifts is something that happens regularly, and it seemed to come as a surprise later on in the year. So,
well, it was factored in at the start. It was factored at the start of the year, but it was factored in at the amount at that time, which the Department of Health in England were basically allowing for pay awards. So it was factored in our lower amount as well. But it's a sheer, in terms of affordability of it, it's a sheer size of it. I mean, are you asking why the department didn't try to pay it earlier? Is that really what?
No, I've heard other ministers say they'd set aside money in their budgets for this, and it seems that the minister didn't in this case. And then he was asking for it all.
Yeah, well, I think the quantum of it in health makes it incredibly difficult to basically set aside at the start of the year. So it does. I mean, it'd be down to choices. For example, your national insurance, the national insurance increase, the in total for Department of Health was around about 140 million. So it was. We didn't get that full support from the executive, but we've chosen, we funded the likes of the FHS, the independent sector. We give them their national insurance increases because that was an inescapable cost that those sectors were incurring. So it might have come down to a choice between, if we wanted to fund pay, we have to say, no, we're not funding any of that. And even though that was an inescapable pressure, pay, everybody deserves to be, paid and rewarded too. But that was still a choice that the minister was going to have to make, in terms of the pay. Whereas the national insurance was all these other, all the bodies, all the support bodies that behind helpful or ALBs were going to be incurring these costs anyway. So that was why things like that were funded, because of the inescapable. National living wage was another one. National living wage costs between 60 and 70 million last year, and out there. It's a legal requirement. It had to be funded too. So so we were aware of the pay pressure. It's just, the quantum was unaffordable even at the start of the year, and then it grew once the pay review bodies made their recommendations in May. It grew by, because their recommendation was higher than what we had allowed for by about 50 million.
So coming into next year, will that forecast be made at a very early stage in order that pay uplifts are factored in at a very early stage?
Pay's always factored in, so it will be. But yes, the minister has given it's his a commitment at the minute that he wants to deal with pay at the outset. So that is in the financial plan at the minute, and then we'll have to see what funding is available and how do we deliver that.
You're going to run that then from day one, effectively?
We're going to try.
Yeah. How do you do that over a 3-year period? Is there?
The pay award will be. It'll just be year on year. So it'll just be for the first year, and then the next year will be looked at in 27-28.
Okay. One other thing I just wanted to ask. We talked about demand-led services. My understanding is demand goes up and down. I assume that this was modelled in those particular services. And I wonder, could you give us an example of a type of demand-led service where there wasn't the demand that you expected, and for what reason?
I think one of them that I touched on earlier was the high-cost drugs. There's drugs, basically factored into the financial plan for specific purposes, and then it comes about, there was less demand there and they're not needed too. The breakdown that what was asked for. The chair's asked for the breakdown. The chair's asked for. I mean, it will provide detail of what you're looking for there.
Okay, I look forward to that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the information today. Just so that I understand better, the piece around the capital pressures and bids, specifically the 126.3 million for the replacement of servers and IT equipment, and it refers to them being now out of warranty. How long were you aware that this equipment was going to be out of warranty, and have you bid previously for that? I mean, surely it hasn't been a case that you waited for these to be out of warranty and then bid for monies to replace them. It was quite stark. It makes reference here that if unfunded, there is a risk to critical IT infrastructure and the risk of collapse of not being able to provide staff across health and social care with required IT equipment.
That's a matter for our digital health colleagues. We simply are managing the funding, so we receive the bid. We don't actually manage the warranties and on the licenses, but that would be expected to be a matter for digital health. There's an extent to which these are serious risks and sort of not so critical risks. You would know for yourself. You would have a TV that goes out of warranty. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't use it anymore, but it is best practice to sort of get it replaced. So it is important that it's replaced, but it is not a sort of not all of it is critical. So but we would expect our colleagues in digital health to continually review their licenses and their equipment to make sure that it's still fit for purpose. But as I say, it's not within our remit.
So the wording from this here isn't as stark as initially painted?
Well, it is important, and what I would say is that because of the position we're facing in 26-27, where we're really under pressure, what we have tried to do is to address, and prudent financial management is to address as many of the pressures over the subsequent years as we can in this year. So I'm not saying that this is not it is not important that it's addressed this year, but it is not critical, but it does help next year so that it will become a pressure in future years, so it's better to fund it now.
Just on the transformation piece, I know the Minister had said that it was his intention to increase out of the Public Transformation Fund 50 million each year. Some of you touched upon two examples earlier there. I think you talked about e-prescribing and family support. Yeah. I assume some of these capital projects, like for me as a constituency MLA, I mean the two key pieces of the jigsaw of Altnagalvin Hospital would be the ED unit and the Altnagalvin Phase 5 paediatrics unit. I assume there is no advance work with regards to transformation that they could be funded as a result of the transformation increase going forward.
I think all the transformation funding is resource.
All resource, not
resource.
Capital?
Yeah, there's no
okay,
capital.
Right. That's okay, I'll bow to that. Okay.
Might be a small element of capital, I think. In some
small.
Fair enough. That's okay, Chair.
See, just in terms of the plans, I mean, I'm wondering, is this going to be included in the 3-year plans? Because I mean, we hear regularly, rightly at times, about how the Minister and the Department are trying to shift left, so more investment in neighbourhood care, more investment in community pharmacy, community and or care in the community, etc. So will that be a focus of the 3-year budget plan, so that we're not continually, just kind of a conversation that you've had with other members here about different things, will we see a difference in the 3-year budget that's kind of arching the curve of how the health department spends its money to invest in things that will save value down the line and improve patient outcomes, which is ultimately the objective?
That'll depend on the outcome of the budget, but at the minute, the investment in the neighbourhood model is all part of the plan. So it is, and also as part of the reset plan. It's a major thing within the reset plan. That's what the department wants to drive forward. So It's certainly the plan and the intention is basically to direct funding towards that.
Because the Minister has said in response to a couple of things I've asked him recently about, he knows that it's anti-strategic. So, for example, not paying health and social care workers, not doing something. So he is saying himself it's anti-strategic. So essentially all I'm saying is now that, because we've always talked in the life that I've been in MLA, we need multi-year budget. So we're finally getting a multi-year budget. So we actually need to see improvements now that we've got to have multi-year. So one of that improvement has to be that a minister in the department has actually been able to fund strategic initiatives that save money.
Well, that will be part of the plan. But as I've touched on earlier on, 26-27 is going to be incredibly difficult. So it is. But we'd like to start that in 26-27, and hopefully the following 2 years will give us the capacity to do more. But at least start it in 26-27.
How much have you bid for 26? We had 8.5 billion this year. I'm just curious.
It's over $1 billion.
It's over
$1 billion.
Okay. Sorry, $1 billion.
Yeah.
8.5 billion. $1 billion extra or?
Billion extra.
Okay, I was thinking, God, you've been really efficient if you're going from 8.5 billion to $1 billion. Sorry. Okay, fair enough. There's no other questions, so thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we're just going to move on then to, well, maybe we'll just see if there's any issues that arise out of that. Is everybody happy? Can we just flag up with the department that are coming next week in relation to the issues that Linda has raised, that we'll be expecting those answered next week?
Will we get those bits where we asked them for, like they said they would come back? Does that they'll come back to you and not the parent? Okay, grant.
Okay, everybody, just move on then to item number 8, written briefing, substance use strategy. Can I refer members to a written briefing from the department on substance use strategy? That's page 113 of the main pack. Ask if anybody has any comments on it. Go ahead, Ursula.
So I think that we should write off to, I think, get some more of a breakdown in terms of what funding has been attached to the action points that they've been able to progress. So they're saying that they're trying to obviously carry out the actions that don't cost a lot of money because they're so tight for funding. But I would like more detail around the second bullet point there around there's been a programme of work initiated focused on co-occurring mental health and substance use services. So a full breakdown of what that means, what that is, what that's going to mean to people battling with addiction on the ground. And then the Peace Plus community and alcohol detoxification services. So in Annex 1 it was saying that they got €8 million from the Peace Plus, where is it? Had it a wee second ago. That they got 8 million from the Peace Plus programme to roll out this community detoxification service in the Southern and Western Health and Social Care Trust. So it's saying in the notes that the project was officially launched on the 13th of November. Maybe I've just genuinely missed that, but I didn't really see or hear much about it. And it sounds brilliant and I welcome it, but I just think maybe more detail that we could get on that would be helpful.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to do that. Everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, next item then is correspondence, item 9. Can I just refer members to the correspondence list at tab 9.1 of the main pack? It's page 136 and correspondence from 138 onwards. Just a few items I have dug out. Tab 9.7. It's corresponds from the department in relation to the rollout of free period products in public-facing trust facilities. The response advises that some trusts will only be rolling out in pilot setting in limited facilities. So we're all aware of the legislation that we came through here. So, I mean, if you've read the correspondence, I mean, some of the trusts are rolling out in a very small amount, whereas some of them are rolling out in a lot. So it seems to be very inconsistent. So I was going to suggest if we write to the department and ask why it has only been rolled out in some facilities, and if they, as a department, have any concerns that it's not in line with legislation.
Yeah.
Okay. Tab 9.8 is a response from the department to ourselves in relation to some of the issues that have been raised with regard to the maternity hospital. So, I mean, they've addressed some issues, but a lot of it is not particularly additional information. I don't know if anybody has any commentary they want to make on it. No.
Covered it.
Okay. The other thing then, just can I refer members to correspond to page 23 of our table of papers, which is from the department in relation to the uncommissioned theatres at the South West Acute Hospital. I don't know if anybody has any commentary they want to make in relation to that. Again, it was a bit underwhelming. Okay. Are members then content with the content and the suggested actions of the correspondent list? Colm?
Can I just ask what? I just want to raise that one on 9.14 about sodium valproate. I've met with these people previously, and it's a really underknown issue, but it effectively was a case where tablets for epilepsy were given to people during their pregnancy, which resulted in some difficulties with the birth and some deformities and other things for the children, and it also caused some substantial issues regarding mental health issues, especially with parents, and it completely destroyed families. Now, I think there was a report that was published via Westminster about a redress scheme. There are not huge numbers of families that are impacted here, but I think there's a sense that it may be underreported because of the mental health element to it. The people are maybe afraid to come forward and say that they were maybe impacted by this. But I'm just not sure maybe how to go about it. I know we're snowed under, but maybe at one of our future reporting days, there's people there that might come up and just explain the issue to us a wee bit more in depth. They've been trying to put pressure on the Prime Minister to try and look at that redress scheme and try and promote it. So if there was maybe something that we could do just to take some soundings on that, because I'm sure it'll probably affect people in all of our constituencies.
Yeah, I totally agree with Colm. There's a constituent in West Belfast with who was impacted by this a terrible health scandal that was inflicted on people, but the report that was done in Westminster, that covers sodium valproate and the mesh redress.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
So the latest update from the Minister was that he is awaiting to see what the British government's going to do. But so I think even it would be helpful in the meantime just even write off to the Minister as a committee to find out if they've had any further update from the British government around the redress scheme, and emphasise the importance of the need for meeting the needs of victims here locally. Yeah.
Okay, so we can do that as Orlia suggested, and also add that group or those individuals to potentially a list for the next one, or the one after the one we're doing in January.
Maybe including some mesh victims as well.
Yeah,
or
we
can keep it separate, Colm.
Yeah.
But
no, I think it's if we can get it all done together and try and advocate, it's good.
Yeah. Okay, members, everybody then content with the other suggested actions. Forward work programme, draft forward work programme is at 2:03. So I would refer to a change in next week's agenda. We had originally scheduled another briefing from the series Adverse Impact Framework. This was in line with the department. With what the department advised would be the timings for the next stage. However, the department has advised that the analysis and responses to the consultation have taken longer than expected, so we're going to reschedule that for the new year. Are members therefore content with the forward work programme as amended?
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay, any other business?
Yeah.
No. Michael Orr. Okay, 12 date, time, place for next meeting. Next committee meeting will be here, room 29, Thursday 11th of December at 2 p.m. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.